2024, it's 9 AM and we're taking up S 286. And activating the regulations of accessory farm businesses. We're gonna have two witnesses this morning. Senator Starr, the sponsor, is on his way, his hopes. And we also have the pleasure of hearing from the chair of the Natural Resources Board, Juan Haskell, and here he is on cue. So good morning, Senator Starr. Good morning. We did please join us at the table, thank you. We've had yeah. Thank you. We've had a brief introduction to the bill, but we haven't heard the human side of the story. So I don't think you could talk to us about what you saw going on and what made you want to put in S 286.
Well, I'm sure the women in here have made shepherd's pie.
I have indeed. I have not. My husband has.
And I think
You have.
I haven't, I watched it.
Right.
You just kept it at the early.
So anyhow, a guy by the name of Paul Roston, I think you were chair of known Paul, has put together business of making shepherd's pie and selling. And he can grow the corn and the potatoes, but I have to buy, I guess, the John Chamber. And what happens is the way the law is, if you don't principally produce the value of the product on the farm, it kind of kicks you out of being doing your work on the farm. And the bill supposedly is to fix that so that he can continue to do this proposed business and still grow his corn and still grow his potatoes and without and purchasing one of the ingredients. So it'd be 2/3 produced on the farm and 1/3 off, but the value is the part that's kind of sticky. So this would open that up so that we utilize ag land and produce a product that is healthy and wholesome, and everything's grown here in Vermont, whether it's the beef or the corn or the potatoes, and it would help our economy. So that's the thought behind it, and Michael O'Grady put the bill together, and with these ideas and so I'd like to get a look at and hopefully pass. But it's if you folks need to change it, if there's something that's on.
Can you send to me and Jude the name of your constituent who's?
Yeah, I think you have that, but
Senator, it's actually your constituent,
yeah.
Paul Ralston.
Paul Ralston.
But the Vermont Dairy Producers Alliance has been looking at this for a number of years as well. Yep.
So cost to buddy.
Not in, he's trying to sell shepherd's pie.
Have
No, he's trying to know HNH, sir.
Get clean channels.
Hmm.
All right, so okay, well, probably you know how to get in touch with Paul. And so there is the bill changes the language employee grown, they're principally produced. And what's your understanding of how we measure principally produced, you know, divide? Remember, we've had discussions about blueberry muffins in the past, the blueberries versus the muffin. Is it by weight, by value?
Well, I took it that if you had two of the three ingredients that were produced on the farm, it would be primarily on the farm. I think if you went to 80-20, then it, you know, it's questionable. But you know, I think that I don't know how you tell that.
Yeah, I don't, well, you know, how it gets questioned by people, I think in the end. It
But
could be
mine
by
was-
something like weight, or otherwise you could,
You know,
your efforts might include one pea raised on the farm, and everything else imported. Okay,
and it's like, if you go by dollars, it's really messy because if you sold your veggies and then you sold your maple syrup, well, you get $50, $50 for a gallon of syrup. And so if you sold 2 gallons of syrup in a day, you'd have close to $100. And if you sold 10 pounds of carrots in a day and a 5-pound bag of potatoes, you know, you got $20. And so it's really in the syrup one to the neighbor, of course, so it's principally produced on your farm. But yeah, and that's why we need to clarify this language. And I thought Michael did pretty good doing that to allow, you know, small farm stands and sometimes, I mean, we've seen them up north, and I bet you folks have, where a little small farm stand keeps growing and growing, and there's one up on Route 12, is it? The Maple Place. And I mean, that used to be just a little creamy and you know, I don't know, some weekends, we'll hop on the motorcycle and drive all the way down there to have a maple creamy, but of course, my wife likes going in there because they got 100 other things you can buy. So it all started from a little maple cream
Is that still a subsidiary business?
It's like no Bragg Farm or Morse Farm,
Yeah, the bride farm,
Bragg Farm.
yeah, and I can't really tell you, Sven. But it's operating and it does well.
Sarah White and Sarah McDonald.
Thank you, Chair Bray. So I guess I'm confused. He can make shepherd's pie. It's totally fine for him to make shepherd's pie as is, and he can sell or donate it as is. As a business, that's totally legal. The question here is whether or not his buildings become exempt from certain things or don't become exempt from certain things. Is that correct?
Well, because it isn't all principally produced on the farm.
So this is a decision basically by the farmer to decide whether or not to produce a product in a certain way. So I guess so I'm actually okay with them not having an exemption as it stands. I think that we over exempt certain things from regulation when it is a business decision, in some ways.
Well,
So I'm wondering if you could speak to so he just wouldn't be making shepherd's pie if he couldn't get this exemption, is that
well,
what was
he
happening?
could still make it, he
Yeah.
just wouldn't be able to produce it on the farm and take it off, and sell it, because it's not principally,
He wouldn't be able to sell it, or I guess,
well, probably could, but he might not be within law.
No,
because it's not principally produced on the farm.
so I guess I'm confused, can this person make and sell shepherd's pie as is? As a legal allowed thing they can produce? My understanding was this just meant that they couldn't, they were exempted from certain land use regulations.
This maybe has,
So it's like it's more of a decision of, do we fall out of our current compliance to make this new product, and I assume there's more taxes and fees, and that's really the impact. It's not that they can't sell it, it's just that they would have different tax or,
no, the
Okay.
food's not taxed.
no, I mean on the property itself. It would take the property out of being considered, like, what does this bill actually do? He can sell shepherd's pie in the way that he is, he can't, or donate it,
Oh, and
he can't make
maybe,
the product and sell it now.
So I think part of the confusulating thing
Yeah.
here is that it's not just. So there's the principally fully grown become principally produced paid for, so there's a threshold for how you qualify. But then upfront, there's also proposed changes that say. If you are an accessory farm business, in addition to being recognized as one, you're now exempted. There's no regional plan,
Oh.
municipal plan, or municipal bylaw for how to affect
I see.
prohibiting one. So it's a bigger
Yeah, that's. the
bigger
part.
door gets opened than just the test of whether or not you're qualified. By an accessory farm business. Once you are, you're also now supposed to exempt you from.
Yeah.
Those regulations and declare basically, you're not a part of. You don't trigger the definition, you don't meet the definition of development.
Is there a way for, or would you be open to us letting this person sell this product? But yes, that is a risk, they would fall out of being exempt from certain things.
why,
So the first part of the bill,
he wants to be in compliance with,
Yeah.
with all the laws and,
Yeah.
and he can't qualify, the way the law is right now, and that's what these changes would do, is to, open that up, so he would be in compliance and legal. I mean, you know, it's like not getting your little sticker on your number plate.
Yeah.
Nobody checks all usually, but somebody could. Call and say, you know, your car is ready or whatever, so you're out of compliance and Paul wants to be in compliance and to achieve that. He felt that these changes were necessary.
okay, yes, I hear what you're saying, I think my question and concern, and I wanna hear a strong rebuttal, I wanna be compelled, because I'm always trying to support farmers. But my concern is that the reason we have wholly produced is in part to give preference and support for farmers to do just that. And we, in a way, wanna preference that because it's overall better for Vermont if you can do everything there, is my understanding, that's kind of the way we've created it. So this would open it up, so I could see a business that doesn't wholly produce in other contexts, not as great as this lovely constituent is doing. This is a great example, very supportive of the idea of this man making shepherd's pie and donating it, that's beautiful. But this could open up the door to many individuals who might now be exempted from some of our land use policy.
The maple syrup and the veggie guy.
Yeah.
So the maple guy has to have his little roadside stand to sell his 2 gallons. The other guy has to have his little stand to sell his carrots and potatoes. And their neighbors, why not let them commingle and allow that to happen? So that you haven't got 2 people sitting at the little stand, you only got one. And, you know, I don't know, it just makes sense to me
Yeah.
that, you try to use your labor as good as you get as much out of them as you can, your work, your hours, and this would allow him to do his shepherd's pie in a legal way and cause nobody improved.
Do you know if, oh, sorry, somebody,
Isn't farm labor exempt from minimum wage?
And
Isn't farm labor exempt from minimum wage?
well, I would think it, it's maybe, or hours, or there's something there. But to get farm labor workers, the minimum wage bill don't do much because you pay them a lot more than that, to be able to hire them.
Oh, I was just following up on a question. Instead of asking, I mean, I'm sure you would never come in if this were passed to say that the people that are working on this shepherd's pie, which is made on a farm by farming as part of farm labor, are not, you don't have to pay them the minimum wage because this is a farm. Now, you wouldn't do anything like that, but you know, who might?
I don't know anybody, because they wouldn't be able to hire anybody to come to work for less than minimum wage. We'd be putting them up in a mountain.
one other quick question, so do you know in the, not that. Want to write the bill based on one case, but do you know if, in the situation that triggered writing this bill, if there's also a problem because of either a regional, municipal, or plan or municipal bylaw that's prohibiting this from moving forward,
Well,
which is why, I mean, I'm trying to figure out why the other language is included
Yeah.
beyond the principally produced piece.
Some communities, you know, they wanna say they would want people farms on a dirt road or a back road. They wanna limit travel on that, so they'll step in and have all kinds of problems. With that, and I don't know where Paul was or where his place of business is.
So that's yummy.
Yeah, maybe they share.
Maybe I've driven, well, he. To the best of my knowledge, he doesn't have a farm, but there's farms both, although he might be partnering up with an neighbor, something like that for all I know. More to learn at home.
I'm sure he would be glad to come and testify.
Very well.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Would you be open to, cause I love the idea of the neighbors together efficiency of that. Is there a way that we can write this law that would give some support for, hey, if you're truly your neighbor or someone within a very close area actually producing it, that can fall under the definition of wholly produced versus what I worry we're opening the door for is folks getting lots of out of state or even very further away products to add to their sailing. So you could say, yes, you can be considered wholly produced if you are within a certain radius of you getting that product. Would that be something you'd be open or you feel would get to the spirit of what you're doing here? Or is that you think it's good, it's only would be helpful for Paul if it's a really open-ended, you can get the meat from anywhere?
Well, I'm in total support of using Vermont products to sell a Vermont
Yeah,
product. And I, you know, we do have some laws that do a 30-mile
And local,
30-mile limit on the border and stuff like that.
well,
Something like that might work, within a certain radius.
I think that was when we were working on defining local.
Yeah, local food is,
What's local?
especially for folks that live along the New York border, or the Mass border.
Yeah.
and
New Hampshire, yeah,
That might work.
thank you for answering that question.
Right, there were problems, people were growing corn in New Hampshire, coming over the bridge, going to Vermont Farmers Market. But
Yeah.
the local
Mm-hmm.
was grown very close by, but the question was, if they grow up in Vermont, could it be sold Vermont as local? So.
These are the tough
Drawing
debates.
on.
And I don't know if that 30 miles helps me, because
Mm,
Cause I live 50 miles or so either way, but Canada's only a mile. So, I don't know if you know where the country.
Yes.
Country is for me.
Love to look into it.
Okay, great. Well, so we'll get contact information from Mr. Alton, and thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you. Okay, do you want any blueberries before you go?
I need
Probably so.
Hey, was that blueberry grown in those?
No. No, okay, that's good, that's a good answer. It wasn't wholly produced.
Okay.
Sorry.
And no, that's the word I was trying to hear something at Kleenex.
Thanks.
Thank you, Senator Starr.
Yeah.
I'd like to invite Ms. Haskell, and if you would like to have more than you would bring the rest of your, the other half of your team with you.
May I invite Allison Stoner,
Yeah,
general
please.
counsel, to join us,
Yeah,
because I'm not a lawyer and I don't.
pull up another chair. So,
But if you get into legal stuff, thank you very much.
you want to just grab a chair?
Sorry, Allison.
Sorry, we're not.
That's a little complicated.
Nice.
The closest one.
All right. Okay, so good morning, thank you.
morning.
We did a bill walkthrough before, with Michael Grady, and you just heard Senator Starr talking about the rationale for it. Love to hear that NRB's take on it also here.
Great.
We never did get to the word, does this constitute development, but it's.
That's big, right, but before I begin, I need to be in another committee at 10 and Allison is gonna stay and just in case, I hope that is,
Absolutely.
okay.
Sorry, we're running a little behind.
Okay, no worries. For the record, I'm Sabina Haskell, I'm the chair of the NRB, and with me today is our general counsel, Allison Mulberry Strong. And I thought I would start with the directive from the legislature in Act 182 that we were to do a report on Act 250 jurisdiction over agricultural businesses. And we worked with the Agency of Agriculture, Food and Markets on this study. We had a pretty full-bodied stakeholder process. We did surveys with farmers and municipalities. We had several public meetings and here's the report, it was filed last January 15th, but I brought a copy of all this, I sent the link and all of that just in case. It's nice and short and concise, which is a nice thing, but the general consensus or the idea was that farmland is disappearing. We want to keep our agricultural lands open and working. We don't want them to be, turned into housing, et cetera, and how do we help farmers be able to afford to keep their lands and prosper with their businesses? And that was the idea. And as you know, farming is exempt from Act 250 as long as you are following the required agricultural processes. So this next step would be recognizing, I always use this example of I grow blueberries on my farm and you grow eggplants on your farm and we're next door to each other. And why can't we sell them together at a stand? Because we're all trying to help each other. And that gets into the whole principally produced, as if by sales, as if by weight and volume, et cetera. Before I move on to those quandaries, it was unanimous that farms should be allowed to have farm stands and sell their products. And then you get into the weight and volume versus total sales. Neither one are easy to enforce. I use in quotation marks. To go out, and we're not going to go out with leaders and measure the volume and take our scales with us. And sales are difficult because so much of the business is cash. So I don't know, I don't have an answer to that. How do you say principally produced or et cetera, but that would be something that would need to be figured out, but everybody wants our farmers to succeed, and there's just fewer of them. And we wanna keep those lands open and working, I mean, that's certainly a premise of Act 250 from 1970. And, so a farm stand selling the produce and products from some local region is the idea, but there is actually, we had quite a bit of conversation about a federal commerce law that you can't limit it. And
Federal Commerce Clause,
yeah,
the dormant Commerce Clause, just that you can't discriminate against
okay.
products from other states that are in the flow of commerce between states, so.
But you could, we did come to the conclusion we could use like an aggregator situation. And the one that I think of from my part of the state is Interville with all the community gardens there, and then they go out and they aggregate products from those community gardens on their property. And they can sell them and do that, so that may be a possibility. When you get to the 1 acre exemption, there was some big give and take on that, I mean, some back and forth, I should say. But if you think about, if we all want to let them be able to have farm stands. And what happens if you have a farm stand and then you make the meal and people come and sit at the picnic tables at your farm and eat the meal and hang out? Now you're getting into 1 acre because you need a driveway and parking spaces. For the farm stand, and maybe a nice, just fun backyard dinner. And we all felt like that was okay as well, so. When you get into events,
What happens if you have to have septic and potable water and a commercial kitchen? To be preparing that food and letting people eat it on the premises?
I suppose you would. But.
Where's the ban, like,
Well, that's, but when you get to the situation of events, entertainment, wedding events, bands. That really, there was a lot of no consensus would be a nicer way to put it. And that those are far more commercial enterprises, if you will. And that, if you were a hotel, you would have to get a permit. First, and so there was a lot of back and forth on that. Again, though, this is a policy decision. We do require wedding events on farms to have permits now. And there's been some jurisdictional opinions for some farms with restaurants that said they didn't need a permit and some that said they did. So it would be certainly important to have it clarified. In law. But as you've heard me talk about with our other Act 250 study, we're trying to come to a place where the different viewpoints and stakeholders have consensus. I've shared that with you. And agriculture and trying to keep the farms working is really important in terms of our Act 250 studies as well. And I say studies plural because of the designation and the mapping.
After this was. I can see we scheduled too little time to dig into this.
Yeah.
But there's reports, I look forward to reading through, there seems like there's quite a few things laid out here to be thought through, and not necessarily clear, bright line recommendations.
I can say that. Right, I can say that I think we really need to do something to help farmers, and I think we really need to do something to help farmlands stay farmlands. Because otherwise they're gonna sell off their acreage for houses, and I think most people have discussed the fact that we don't want more straw, excuse me, not straw.
Well, also down straw.
Yeah, but I mean, there are some steps that really need to be taken, and we did not reach consensus on events to your point, Senator McDonald, but we certainly did with the farm stands and letting farmers come together to sell each other's products and all of that, and
farmers markets?
farmers markets, basically.
Well, and we've, It didn't start with farm to plate, although they gave it a big food. We defined and recognized value-added products and opportunities to just stop selling commodities at wholesale. So it's retail sales off the farm are another way to eliminate the middleman and be more profitable.
We wanna have locally grown food, we wanna keep the lands open for climate change, I mean, we wanna eat our own food. You know, I mean, all those things are really important, and we need to help the folks who are doing it, do it.
Sure. Well, it's not your bill, but there is a section in there that eliminates review body for regulation by municipal law, municipal bylaw or RPC. Based on your experience in developing this report, did you find that that was a significant? There was a significant rate at which the impediment to an on-farm business was actually a local law.
I would say no, because of Act 143, right? I mean, there's municipal, they need to get married, if you will. Yeah. And that was part of why this, I believe the study was asked for. Is because 143 was out there, but it didn't actually connect all the dots. Is that helpful?
Yes,
Okay.
I mean, it feels like we need more information and digesting this report to follow up on that conversation will be important. And we've already done a lot of work.
And we're just right down the block, so remember.
Okay.
Yeah.
We'll come over for blueberries.
Okay.
Exactly, I know, now I feel.
And I always pick on eggplants because I hate eggplants. Well, I just think, to me personally, I love blueberries. So
Right.
I grow them and then somebody else grows
My husband
them.
needs somebody else.
But they don't make the same copies, like.
But he's wrong.
You're wrong.
He's wrong. It's a bad preference.
All right, so thanks so much. Any committee questions for Ms. Haskell?
Or any legal, I'm making her do the legal stuff.
Always good to catch us over.
Yeah.
Quick comment on the farm discussion. The question here is not whether or not it's a good thing for farmers to have on the site food. I think we all agree that's a good thing. And we want those businesses, right? The question really is the Act 250 exemption. Because no one's saying they can't do it. What you're saying is get your permit and do it. And the question, but then I get the logic, like certainly with the farms, just a little farm stand. You know, that is an adjunct to the agricultural. So the question really, where exactly do we draw the line? I mean, I presume we're not gonna say that a supermarket that has a vegetable section.
Yeah.
Should get an agricultural exception, yes. Okay, so somewhere in between the supermarket and the card table with the potatoes on it. And the little girl is selling one.
And a picnic table with a pie, you know,
Yeah,
or a
yeah.
dinner.
Somewhere in between there is, and of course, I've never been comfortable with Act 250 exemptions, because Carrie, it's based on the assumption something wrong with Act 250. And then some benefit to not have. And I don't agree with that premise, but I also understand I'm in the minority on that these days.
Well, and.
So there probably gonna be exemptions, there's always been an agricultural exemption, so where exactly that line goes,
I mean, these folks are working 6 and 7 days a week, you know, sun up to sun down. And the average farmer's age is, I think, 58 or something like that, and you want your next generation to be able to do this, or do you want to sell off the land?
Younger than the legislature.
I think you've,
Yeah.
it's a rather grandiose consequence.
Yeah, I mean, it just, and just one last thing, and I'm opening another kettle here, but another thing that came up a lot is if you had a farm stand, should you be able to sell a baseball cap with your farm name on it?
Yeah,
That's what we think too, but then you're starting to move away from.
they do it now, though. I feel like I own a few farm stand hats personally.
Yeah, but then just those were some of the other questions that came up, it got very interesting. Are we paving the way for a Dollar General?
Well, the bill sponsor was talking about stopping in favor of creepy stand that now has 100 other things inside. None of which well, I don't know what's inside, 100 other things. Maybe principally produced on the farm.
What about a gravel pit?
Yeah.
No, when years ago, a farmer in, Randolph. Wanted these to not have to get an active. Was that because was on the farm and it would pay the taxes. So it would expedite it.
Probably not part of the RAS.
Yeah, I don't think that would fall within
Practice.
the line drawn, but I mean, this bill
Well, we
still.
said no.
Yeah.
This is still requiring to meet the definition of an accessory on farm business, and then it has the geographic, or not geographic, but size limitation in terms of the acre. So, but it does expand that definition a little bit in terms of the qualifying products can be part of the farm business.
So there's a limit on how many shepherd's pies.
Yeah. I don't know if there's a limit on there's a limit on the size of the construction improvements you can make to sell the shepherd pie.
We built the biggest thing we can build and we're selling more shepherd's pies than, we need a place for the 18-wheelers to turn around, to take them out. Yes, the freezing machine makes a lot of noise, and, but we're exempt.
Sounds like a case in forward. All right, so.
I love shepherd's pie.
Yeah. Okay,
Thank
thank
you
you
for
for,
being a shepherd.
thank you for helping us get started. Obviously, there's a lot of nuance.
Very much.
And you're waking everyone's brains back up to all the previous conversations about how we've tried to work on.
We gotta do something to help the farmers and keep the land open.
Yeah, perfect. We'll end on a note.
That's definitely an
Yeah.
act sixties.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Okay,
With that, we are going to move to another bill entirely, and that bill is H 599, and after relating to retroactive or
I
reinstatement
think you
and
can, yes.
PSA,
Yes.
6081 B. Good morning, Mr. Kowski. We have. But usually take up House bills prior to crossover, but this is a different kettle of fish. So could you explain what, so obviously 599 has. Their performance, you join us, thanks so much, sorry. We, 599 is, we're taking up a House bill well before crossover because there's some urgency. So could you introduce the bill to us and explain the urgency?
Ellen Tchaikovsky, Office of Legislative Counsel. Yes, today we're looking at H 599. I will tell you the backstory before I explain the language. But I hope you noticed in the title that this bill is doing something very, very specific and limited. It is retroactively reinstating 6081B. That means we are putting back language that has existed previously for 53 years. And was accidentally deleted last session in Act 53. Last year, you all passed Act 53, an act relating to boards and commissions, which was a very large sort of technical correction bill that came out of the government operations committees. So this is a technical correction to the technical correction bill. In that bill, it changed, in one segment of the bill, they were eliminating all references to the Board of Health because that board no longer exists, it's the Department of Health. And so there was a miscommunication that in this language on this page, there is a reference to the Board of Health, and instead of getting rid of it, they got rid of the entire section. And this section is very important because
As
it is,
opposed to revising the name, the Department of Health.
yes.
Yeah.
So this section is very important, it is a foundational part of Act 250. So I will read you through the language, but this bill includes a retroactivity provision so that it backdates this going into effect the same day the repeal went into effect, so that there is no gap in this statute. Because it is important to how Act 250 works. So there are 5 sentences in this bill. We are putting, the bill proposes to put back nearly identical language. I say nearly identical because the editors in my office have changed the whiches to that and made some comma changes, but mostly just for grammar. So, where are my notes?
So the really, like editorial stylistic change.
Yes. So the first sentence says. Subdivision, subsection A of this section. Shall not apply to to a subdivision exempt. Under the regulations of the Department of Health. In effect on January 1, 1970, January 21, 1970. Or any subdivision that has a permit. Issued prior to June 1, 1970. Under the Board of Health regulations. Or as pending a bona fide application for a permit under the regulations of the Board of Health. On June 1, 1970. With respect to plats on file as of June 1, 1970. Provided that such a permit is granted prior to August 1, 1970. So there's a few things happening here. First, subsection A of this section is the section of Act 250 that establishes that no subdivision or development may commence construction without an Act 250 permit. It is the primary functional language of Act 250. And so what this is saying, this is the first in the list of exemptions, sorry, from Clark. This is the first exemption that was established in Act 250. It's part of the 1970 language. And so you can see the reference throughout the first section, the first sentence to 1970, when this bill was passed. So first what it's doing, it's exempting or sort of grandfathering. Subdivisions that were exempt under Department of Health regulations, so things that were already exempt under what was the building scheme at the time. Anything that had a permit from the Board of Health or a pending application at the Board of Health. So the projects that were already in process that were operating under the Board of Health or Department of Health regulations at the time were exempt from this brand new law, Act 250.
And is it, I'm just remembering from study Act 250 history that there was some competition in a way between Department of Health was regulating places for like I don't know, safe and sanitary conditions. And prior to Act 250, that's who was trying to look out for sort of development and public health, right? And then we come along and start doing it from a land use plan. So that's why health is in here.
Yeah, I mean, I can't really speak in depth to what the exact form of the regulations were, but yes, they had some part in regulating buildings at the time because we didn't have Act 250 governing construction like we do now. So the second sentence is more of the same. So subsection A of the section shall not apply to a development that is not also a subdivision, which has been commenced prior to June 1, 1970. If construction will be completed by March 1, 1971. So again, projects that are in process that will be completed. Subsection A of the section shall not apply to a state highway on which a hearing pursuant to 19 VSA section 222 has been held prior to June 1, 1970. So state highways that were already in process that have had a public hearing. Those are exempt also. And then next, more of the same, but a later addition, subsection A of this section shall not apply to any telecommunications facilities in existence prior to July 1, 1997. Unless the facility is development as defined in 6001(3). So again, setting a deadline by which there was a transfer of jurisdiction over things and exempting those things that were in existence prior to that. And then finally, probably one of the most important pieces, subsection A of the section shall apply to any substantial change in such accepted subdivision or development. So this establishes the trigger that
I see why we're here.
this is concerning. So this establishes what the trigger is for a project that has been exempt all this time. So this says a substantial change triggers the need for an Act 250 permit to one of these grandfathered structures. So without that operative language. An existing structure that has been exempt from Act 250 for 50 years. Could now need a permit like now. Because there's no trigger established in statute and there's no grandfather provision exempting them. So,
Someone could ask for a JO or something.
yes. Yeah. More than, well, they could start with JO or they could just ask for enforcement.
Right,
So-
also seems like it could let, without the substantial change language. Someone who is exempt could now say, oh, I'm free to go. I'm correct, I'm gonna change my exempted property, but I'm not gonna be called in because there's no language to call me.
No, it's
for
the
a-
opposite, I think no change would be required, a 50-year building that hasn't made any change in the last 200 or 50 years. There's just no trigger, it just says any construction, so. Yeah. So. No one, this language was repealed not consciously. So. It is in this bill, so then the retroactive provision is section 2, and it's putting it back to June 8th. Which is the day that that Act 53 went into effect.
Okay, so it recreates the exemptions in law.
Yes.
For a whole collection, of who knows what, of projects
Including state highways, including telecommunication facilities.
that were exempted. Using this law.
Yeah.
Okay,
It doesn't create any rules
Correct.
or.
It restores language, returns to the status quo.
So if your Volkswagen bus is in the hole and covered with dirt. And it's still accepting sewage and it's not running down the hillside, you're good.
I'm not agreeing to, I have no response.
You're a wise one.
It depends, and so finally, I will just say that, yes, you're taking it up before crossover, because. The longer this law is not in statute, the greater the risk that someone could act under the repeal.
the unintentional repeal.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so committee, let me ask, do you, feeling like we may want to come back. One more time.
Voting on this?
Well, no, I listed it as potential vote, if we said, well, this is a complete slam dunk. Let's just take care of it, it's an error in how a bill got passed, let's just fill that back in. I don't know,
I feel.
that I'm comfortable with that, but I don't know if people feel like, oh, I wanna walk. I'd like to walk around the tree one more time, think about it. So where are people? Are we comfortable making a technical edit, would you like to, how about this? I'm lawmaking, no, we'll for we'll schedule another meeting, let people mull it over. Do we have any questions we wanna ask council before moving on? Other than about the microbus that's buried, whatever. Senator Watts.
Thank you. Do you think there's anyone we should hear from on this?
No, the NRB is here though. And I think that they will confirm what I have said. But they are here in case you wanna ask them about anything.
Well, let's do one stop shopping and visit again with the NRB before. More questions for council.
So, again, I'll just say one other thing on that. So I found this error.
You found.
Yeah. I found, so every year at the end of the session, after you all go home, we reread everything that is passed as part of the enactment process. So I actually read it after it was enacted. And I was,
You're like, oh god.
yep, because I didn't do it. So,
We want to, should we ask again?
Oh,
no, it doesn't matter, because really, all of you voted for it.
that's true.
Oh, that.
Okay, thank you so much. If we have any other questions, we'll ask you to come back in. I think let's not act on it quite so instantly. It feels a little rushed. But while we have the NRB, thank you, Mr. Kelsey. And would you like to rejoin us to our table, please? Thanks so much, and just reintroduce yourself to the record and then.
Allison Milbury Stone, General Counsel for the Natural Resources Board,
Good morning.
for having me back. So, as Ellen said, we do support reinstating this language, which really is putting things back to the status quo. I might have heard Senator Bray's question a little bit differently than Ellen did, because I do think there's potential, if I heard you right, for somebody to make the argument that they don't need a permit for a certain change.
Right, this is not a substantial change.
I don't need to come in, I've been doing this.
I can do this, and it doesn't constitute a substantial change, that's good.
Right, so I guess it would have to, there is a different definition in our rules, which I can pull up, it's different than the definition of development. So I think if somebody was doing something on a pre-existing project, we would be looking at, you know, if there was no substantial change jurisdiction, we'd be looking at, is that activity rising to the level of meeting the definition of development in and of itself, and then maybe it would need a permit, but there is probably, because the definitions aren't exactly the same of development and substantial change, there might be room for argument that certain things that we would now be taking jurisdiction over are no longer under our purview, so.
From two sides, a good thing to read and say.
Yes.
There's no problem with ex post facto legislation. I think it's retroactive.
I think you can do things retroactively as long as if you intentionally indicate that you want it to be backward looking. I don't.
What about someone who does something legal under the present law? That then when we change it backward, it becomes illegal.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that does. I want to chime in on that,
So
but
checking with what's happening before.
That's right.
I mean, I presume it's okay. I wanted to explain to me what it's okay, so.
So you're not doing that in this bill, you're doing the opposite. You're not criminalizing anything retroactively. You're actually keeping an exemption, you're going status quo. If we were to say things built in 1970 now that have never had a permit now need a permit, that would be a concern. We're doing the opposite here.
I guess somebody could make an argument about that they thought the law changed and they acted under that, and I think that would have to get hashed out through the legal processes, but I think there's also we do still have a definition of substantial change in our rules, and so there may be some room for argument that there still is some authority for that, but I think it would definitely be helpful to reinstate the clear legislative authority for what's fleshed out in our rules.
Great, thanks for Sarah McDonald.
We've been doing a couple of bills here, but this is on the notion of slippery slopes. But when you say there could be an argument, the word appeal just blasts inside my skull. And some might say, well, if there's room for an argument, does that mean we're gonna get appeals? And isn't that what's wrong with Act 250 to begin with, that there's arguments and there are appeals, and we have to get rid of any arguments?
I don't know if I would agree that the appeals process is what's wrong, like what we most need to fix with. That might be a conversation for another day, but I think, I don't know, I say that lawyers can find a lot of room for argument and legislative interpretation across the board, so I don't know if this is any different from, how people can argue with other applications of our laws, and just note it, I don't know that,
Where would such an argument be resolved?
I suppose it depends on where it was raised, but if somebody was asking for a jurisdictional opinion about whether they needed a permit for something we would characterize as a substantial change, and they did the activity during this period, between whatever the effective date of this repeal was, probably July 1st, 2025,
June 8th.
June 8th, thank you, June 8th, 2023, and whenever a correction got passed, that maybe they would ask for an opinion. And if they were told they needed a permit because of this reinstatement of the law, then they might appeal that to the Environmental Division of Superior Court. Which would render decisions.
Mr. Chair, we're in an environment where there are buzzwords like appeals and this and that, the next thing. In the last bill we had. A few minutes back, we're dealing with things that might be all sorts of appeals, precedents, and that and that next thing, so. It's worrisome.
I would say that that risk is more limited in that it's not been right now, it's been 6-ish months that for these sort of things to happen. We do, and there's a limited number of projects that are pre-1970. And some of the things that but we do still use this with, it's not rare that we would have substantial change jurisdiction, but it's also, there's probably more projects that we're looking at in other categories, new developments, things, but. I think some of the things we've seen that are substantial change to the state, maybe have other triggers or they happen outside of this 6-month window, so I don't know that. I haven't seen a lot of things come across my desk that are. At risk for that type of appeal, but. Can't. Say it's outside the realm of possibility, but I think it'd be good to get it fixed sooner rather than later, and then we don't have to shoot.
And the telecom facilities that are exempted here are probably all still in existence, someone might be interested in doing something with it further, like they do get changed, revised, dated, based, blah, blah, turn it down.
Hypothetical, I'm of a litigious nature. Someone does something where this bill has not passed yet, and they do something thinking they're exempt. Okay. But I don't like what they did. Can I say they weren't exempt when they did? Or does this bill take care of that because it's retroactive? Well, we've made it exempt retro.
So you're saying you would ask for a jurisdiction, something you would ask for a jurisdictional opinion about
Yeah.
whether.
But they weren't exempt when they did it.
Yeah, you could, each person can ask for a jurisdictional opinion.
Because the retroactivity in this address that. The answer is, well, they made it.
Yes, I would say it does, but yes.
This is a fun bill.
Yeah.
I can imagine if we were in court and we were reinstating this and someone listened to this discussion, they would see exactly that we're trying to clarify it.
Yeah.
Like, rather than. Okay, any other questions? Thank you so much for coming in. Mr. Costa, before you depart, could you rejoin us at the table briefly to talk about retroactivity?
Yes. Yes, so. Yes, making this retroactive is intended to not lead to any litigation, to avoid litigation and someone challenging what a gap in this statute would mean for people who are acting. So yes, putting it back to June 8th is intended so that on paper, Act 53 went into effect on June 8th. I learned about enactment in doing this. So when a bill goes into effect, even though the governor signed it at whatever time he did, it went into at midnight, 12:01 on the 8th. And so by making this bill's effective date also June 8th, 2023, it also was effective at 12:01 on June 8th. So a deletion happened and putting this retroactive provision in means that this language is immediately reinserted at the same time to avoid a gap in the language and therefore avoid any potential litigation from someone with
a litigious.
There's no litigious,
Sorry.
yes. To avoid someone, yes. Doing something like that and causing general confusion. Because I do not think the legislature intended to open up this large gap in action.
Right, the fact that it came out of the bill with an entirely different purpose, addressing boards and commissions. Also, it seems to me just as things had did it, but there's nothing intentional about modifying Act 250. Okay,
And so specifically on retroactivity, if you'll notice in section 2, in the effective date, I had to include a notwithstanding provision. A notwithstanding 1 DSA section 214. So in your statutes, there is an inherent presumption, well, it's not even a presumption, there is a statement that nothing is retroactive. So in order to accomplish this, you need to specifically say you're doing something retroactive.
and that every once in a while. But it is allowed, it makes it hard for you to do. But my usual understanding of concern is that as we said before, you've taken away a right someone has, that they thought they had by going back in time, as opposed to, in this case, you're reinstating and right because operating that legally, that is an exemption. Okay, so let's sleep on this, but not long. And let the word it out shortly, but maybe, that's. It was an error that led to this, so let's just slow ourselves down, and that's what we feel like we're totally clear before we get paper and just that and not feel like we're in any uncertainty about it. Thank you so much. And I would ask committee members to say Wednesday, but let's vote this out by the end of the week, just so there's no reason to leave the law sort of hanging out longer than necessary. So if you have we have 2 members of the government operations committee where that 40 commission report can approve. So if you might sort of check in on your side of the in your committee, make sure that there's no like, wait, what's happening over there to a bill we did in the box. Okay. Thank you. Great. And with that, let's go. Sorry, Ms. Smith, that we are running through time. The word Act 250 seems to trigger more discussion rather than less, almost every time it ever comes out. So we've asked you to come back, thanks so much, to help us understand at the nuts and bolts level, the agency's proposal that we heard about at a high level from Secretary Morgan today. So for people following, we are turning again to Bill S213, map relating to the regulation of wetland, river border development, and safety. We asked Ms. Smith to join us to help us walk through the bill form of yesterday's proposal. Good morning, and thank you for coming back.
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to the committee for having me back. I will try to be efficient, but I think that it's important to clarify a couple things about the agency's proposal. We did provide the committee with a strike through copy of S213 as introduced, but it got confusing because the agency's proposal is basically an entire strike through that. And this is a very pared down revisions to the same sections of law, but that focus on prioritizing and optimizing the work the agency is doing in these areas already, in a way to sort of effectively move our current regulatory programs forward. So I am just here for the nuts and bolts, the drafting nuts and bolts, and I think that Rob Evans from the Rivers program might join on the Zoom, but I don't know what the availability was. Okay. Okay, cool. So you can answer programmatic questions if they come up around the river board.
Great, thank you.
The agency's proposal, it's, it doesn't have the official ledge council, drafting. But I did put, page numbers on to make it a little bit easier to follow. So, we started with the wetlands piece, and the amendments that the agency has proposed,
Sorry,
Yeah.
I'm calling, sure everyone's the same thing, so there is a. Oh, you're working from your clean copy or you,
I'm working from the agency's clean proposal.
Yeah.
Yes.
so just so that everyone can get the same thing, so I printed that last night, so I could look, it's a 17-page document.
This is this one, so we're looking at this one and not the red line one.
Correct. I'm walking through the clean proposal. If there are questions about the cross references, I can answer those as well. But what I'm doing is just walking through the agency's proposal.
Great,
Will we walk through the other one?
well, let's see, I mean, I just think in terms of. Understanding how they implement what was discussed yesterday, it's a lot cleaner to see. Their proposal and then will be returned to. It'll be our job. To put things, manage two different ways of working. Our own base bill is S213, draft 1.1. And we'll build on that, so.
Okay. And this was not drafted by our ledge council, this was, okay.
Right.
This was drafted by yours truly.
Oh, hey.
Yeah, please.
And thank you for page numbers.
I-
I
I included the page numbers and line numbers because those are really helpful in mapping the planning commission. The revisions to the wetlands piece, section, also the section numbers are not all, I wasn't sure how this would fit into your bill, so section numbers may need to be modified out, obviously. Revisions to 10 VSA 9M1. This piece is in S213 as introduced. These are updates to the water resources management policy that's currently in statute. The agency, as Julie Secretary Moore mentioned yesterday, aligns with this, with the premise that our work should promote the net gain of wetland acreage. And so the language in 9.1, 2, and 3 is the same language that appears in S213 as introduced.
Okay.
There was one proposed amendment in 213 to the title of 901, water resources and wetlands management policy. As Secretary Moore stated yesterday, the agency considers wetlands to be a water resource and felt that it was important to maintain that consistency across the board. The next section that the agency is proposing changes to section 10 VSA section 916. This relates to the updates to wetland mapping. Consistent with the proposal in S213, the agency has language that says on or before January 1st, 2026. The Agency of Natural Resources shall update the SWF. So it would be a requirement for at least an annual update. Our revision includes on or before January 2026 and no less than annually, because we actually do appreciate the flexibility to make updates throughout the year as necessary. So instead of just having one annual update, it would be a minimum of an annual mapping update with an allowance for additional updates if needed. In particular, when we go through the rulemaking process and we designate a class 1 wetland, it's important that that gets on the map as quickly as possible so that communities are aware of boundaries around those wetlands. The annual update shall include integration of georeference shapefiles. That's consistent with S213. Section B as proposed is that the agency will complete high quality national wetland inventory plus mapping for all tactical basin plans. Again, this was one of the provisions in S213 as introduced. The difference in the agency's language is that the S213 requires that the tactical basin planning mapping happen every 5 years. Our proposal requires that the agency evaluate, we do complete that first round of tactical basin planning mapping, and then on a 5-year basis, consistent with the update to the basin plan, the agency evaluates the need for additional updates to that map. from the program's perspective, there are sort of diminishing returns once you actually complete that high level mapping. And so just for capacity purposes, sort of prioritizing those basins that really need an update based on changes to the landscape. We'd like the flexibility to evaluate those on a 5-year basis rather than a requirement of the update every 5 years.
So Mr. this is the example that Secretary Moore had said with the consultant, where you have the consultant do the mapping first and then you don't necessarily need, you only are doing maintenance on it.
Essentially, yes. Some of those more detailed questions about the on the ground mapping, I would ask, I could come back with more information from program staff, but that's essentially the idea, yeah. Thank you. The agency's proposal does not include revisions to section 918. This was the proposal in S 213 that required a 2-to-1 ratio of net gain in compensatory mitigation on every permitted site. For the purposes of time, I'm just gonna move on. The agency's proposal, I'm sure we'll have a discussion about that.
Yeah.
As you continue to discuss.
Right, and especially for everyone, sake, trying to figure this all out, since we have. My sense is we'll end up having some committee work as well as asking interested parties to meet outside of committee. As we often do, and then advance drafts of things. To the extent that we can find a consensus, great, but the goal remains voting a bill out by a week from this Friday, so this is very helpful to have language that we can start to lay side by side, start to edit our way towards a complete thing.
I will refer back to the section, this 916. I should also point out, S 213 contains a provision related to mapping notice. Secretary presented this yesterday. It would require notice at the town clerk level and in newspapers. This would, as the secretary noted, this would be a fairly substantial burden on the agency for mapping updates. Currently, our rule requires map updates be noticed on a statewide basis on the environmental notice bulletin. The map is noticed, there's then a 30-day comment period, and if the public requests a meeting to discuss something that appears on the map, the agency will hold that meeting.
Yeah.
But we are currently using our it's the type 4 notice process, which is in our chapter 170, which we use as sort of a consistent rate for all of our permit noticing process. Obviously, these maps are not permit, but we try to rely on the work in chapter 170 to provide notice and comment consistently.
So is this moving up a level to like type 3 because you have to go to the newspapers?
This wouldn't change with our proposal doesn't change what the agency's doing at all.
Yeah.
In S 213, the newspaper notice would be a change. That would be sort of an additional layer of notice that we don't currently provide for map updates.
So one of the things that came up in our discussion already that maps are, I know to myself, it was maps, like lesson of the day, maps are political. And so it would read, the secretaries emphasized the need for community engagement in order to make sure that we had enough of a conversation to bring everyone along. So I'm just checking in with you, since the agency's already expressed that sensitivity, how do you look at people don't want an unnecessary burden? On the other hand, how do we ensure that we don't surprise the public as maps that we find?
I think that that's an important element of having an up-to-date map is to provide the best notice that we possibly can of the presence of wetlands. Whenever a project is proposed, a landowner is still expected to have the wetland delineated. The maps present a high-level approximation to the best of our ability using both LiDAR and on-the-ground verification, but the actual boundary of the wetland, if there's a project proposed, still needs to be evaluated. So the maps are intended to provide information and notice. I also, in terms of notice to mapping updates, The maps are available on the agency's atlas, and at any point in time, you're not limited to that 30-day notice period. At any point in time, somebody can request that an ecologist from the program come out. If they think that a wetland that is identified as significant is actually not significant. The agency does a lot of field work, free of charge right now, just, going out and looking at folks' property because they're concerned about what shows up on a map versus what's on the ground. So there's always that opportunity, to, ask for assistance from the agency and also to actually petition for a wetland classification change if there's a substantive objection to a wetland that's been identified on the map as significant.
Okay.
Section 10 VSA, section 919, this is the wetlands program report. This is also in S213, there is a requirement for a wetlands program report. The reporting requirements that are in the agency's proposal are slightly less rigorous than those that are proposed in S213. A lot of this is sort of, the agency does collect data currently on its permitting efforts and submits that to EPA on an annual basis. This would also provide those permitting reports to the committees of jurisdiction in the legislature. And so it would include information on the location and acreage Class 2 wetland losses permitted by the agency. The acreage of Class 2 wetlands gained through permit-related enhancement and restoration, and any enforcement actions taken by either the agency or the Attorney General to enforce the state wetland regulations throughout over the past year. This also includes under 919B a more comprehensive 5-year reporting requirement that would include those mitigation requirements associated with state permitted projects, a summary of compensatory fees paid to the inland fee program in the state, the total number of projects reviewed by the agency, an analysis of historical trends of wetland loss and gain in the state, including data analyzing projects for which wetland permits were issued, the results of the NWI plus mapping project over that 5-year period, including net acres mapped, vegetative composition, tributaries, and applicable any other information from that mapping project. And finally, the 5-year report would include total losses, alterations, and gains, including permit decisions related to Class 1, Class 2 wetland buffer loss. So sort of a 5-year compilation of all of the permitting activity happening in the state at the state level. So that's the agency's proposal as it relates to wetlands. The next section is development in river corridors. The first revision is to 10 VSA section 752. This is the definitions, and these are just grammatical tweaks to the definition of development as flood hazard area. These are consistent with grammatical tweaks that were proposed in S213. The agency's proposal does not include the definition of mapped river corridor, which is proposed in S213, because that definition was then tied to the regulatory proposal in the larger S213. So for the agency's purposes, we didn't need that definition. That's why it's not good. Mr. Chair.
You're right.
But if we were to move forward with some of the proposals that use that definition in S213, are you comfortable with that definition of that thing?
I can't fully answer that, although because Rob might be able to answer that if you're interested in hearing a response on that, but I didn't include it in this language, so I won't have a great answer for you.
Okay. Mr. Evans, do you want to just introduce yourself for the record, and do you have a comment in response to Senator White's question?
Sure, and good morning for the record, Rob Evans, Rivers Program Manager, and the definition as articulated in the bill that was introduced works for the program. It captures what we need it to capture, which is that mapped polygon on our atlas, that 5,600 miles of stream.
So don't include it in your version, but if it were to be included, the definition does not cause problems for you as a definition.
Correct.
Thank you, I'm trying to follow both simultaneously, and just noticed that in the, the red line version, the definition of map river corridor is still here. So, it must have been a later edit, I just wanted to.
Yes, and that, I will, the red line version does not contain all of the agencies. Edits because it started to get difficult to sort of, that's why I created the clear document, and I apologize for.
No,
That's created, when I was making too many red lines and it was becoming unreadable.
Right, like when you turn on comments and there's like a spider web of boxes.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
So we shared the red line version because it does provide some context for the agency's edits, but it does not include all of the edited language.
That's fine.
In the next provision in the agency's proposal related to river corridors are amendments to 10 VSA 754, which is the agency's current authority to have a flood hazard area and river corridor rule and regulation that we administer. So this is the section that relates to our current permitting authority. The agency administers this permit over all activities that are exempt from municipal regulation. In S213, the proposal, the S213 as introduced, largely modifies this language, strikes through, and then creates this as a permitting program that the state administers over the entire, over all flood hazard area and river corridors in the state. The agency's proposal does not do that. And the agency's proposal does include certain updates to the rulemaking content that are consistent with S213. In 754B, there's a new requirement that the rules set forth the process for amending the statewide river corridor base maps. The agency's comfortable with that. And in the discretionary rulemaking section, a discretionary option for the agency to include requirements for the maintenance of existing and native riparian vegetation is also consistent with what's in 213 as introduced. But and then the final amendment to S750, or sorry, 10 VSA 754 here is new language at the end that requires that a person who is commencing construction and development subject to an Act 250 permit in the floodplain get an agency's permit, agency flood hazard area permit. This would be a new requirement. Currently, the agency provides regulatory recommendations in Act 250 proceedings and advises on meeting the no adverse impact standards in the flood hazard areas. The permitting requirement would be new, and it would be a change to the process for those projects that are undergoing Act 250.
So now you advise the NRB.
Correct.
But this just says outright you need to
You need the permit, which would then create the rebuttable presumption of compliance with that 1D. And then the final revision to 754 under municipal authority. We've added a sentence that states any municipal flood hazard area bylaw or ordinance adopted by a municipality enrolled in the National Flood Insurance Program, the NFIP, complies with the requirements of the state flood hazard area standards as described in section 755 of this chapter. And this is our new, yes. So then the next section, 10 VSA 755, currently refers just to the municipal education and model flood hazard area bylaws that the agency, these are resources the agency currently provides for municipalities implementing the NFIP program. This would become a required, the agency would be required to adopt a statewide flood hazard area standard tool. So this is new 755A as proposed by the agency's new language. Required municipal flood hazard area standards. It would require that the agency adopt this rule by January 1st, 2026. The rules shall establish a set of flood hazard area standards required to be adopted and administered by all municipalities enrolled in the NFIP. The content of the rules shall be required to contain flood hazard area standards that meet or exceed the minimum use standards of the NFIP program. It says exceed, it should say meet or exceed into there. That's it. By reducing flood risks to new development and ensuring that new development does not create adverse impacts to adjacent pre-existing development. This requires that municipalities participating in the program adopt the state minimum standards, but does not preclude them from adoption of higher standards versus the ceiling conversation. Okay. And requires that municipalities update their flood hazard area bylaws to comply with the state standards. Okay. Then. Mr. Chair.
That's okay. If a town were to have their regional planning commission. Is there a way for a regional planning commission this to do some kind of? To do it for multiple towns? To have them meet the standard?
Currently, the municipalities implement the program through their own zoning ordinances or bylaws. And so I think that there may be opportunity for regional planning commissions to provide assistance, but I can't speak to how they would otherwise be involved in the regulatory process here. And Rob might have additional insight as being on the ground with this, but generally the federal requirements associated with eligibility requires municipalities to undertake certain obligations to maintain their eligibility.
Okay. So like a regional planning commission can say, we pass all of this for all of our towns that we represent.
My reading of Title 24, where the municipalities adopt bylaws related to this, it would actually require the municipalities to undertake that, those revisions on their own.
And that's because FEMA requires it this way. And this standard is based off of what FEMA requires.
Yes, FEMA requires eligible communities to meet certain requirements, including adoption of flood hazard area regulations that meet their standards.
Okay, so we're just building off of that, so we really need to do it that way. There's not a way that we can allow. I guess it's kind of, I'm trying to, that's, I think the big debate for me is what we've heard from our municipalities saying like, this is a burden and it's hard for us to do already. So if there was a way, and it seems like this language does not allow for it because of the way the federal law is written, not necessarily a preference of the agency.
Not a preference of the agency, no. The other, as Rebecca Pfeiffer mentioned yesterday, one of the benefits with establishing a rule that imposes a statewide minimum standard would be the agency's ability to provide quicker and more comprehensive technical assistance, including things like permit templates, sort of administrative notice guidance, how do you issue the permit, how do you provide notice, how do you provide a hearing for that.
But this wouldn't preclude in the future if, let's say, we transition to a more regional approach of doing this type of standard. This wouldn't lock us into doing it this one way necessarily, or is it just, I don't want to set us up for failure if we realize actually we would want to do it on a more regional basis in the future.
No, this requirement is on the agency, essentially, to adopt a rule that establishes these flood hazard area standards that would apply statewide. The standards themselves would largely be a reflection of what the agency implements in its own flood hazard area reporter rule that applies to activity exempt from municipal regulation. And what the way that the agency's proposal is drafted, it does require municipalities to adopt those same standards, but it doesn't preclude some kind of regulatory reorganization in the future.
Okay.
If there's a more efficient way to do this, as Rebecca referenced yesterday, there are states where There is a statewide permitting program. It doesn't then protect the towns from still having to comply with their FEMA obligations, so there's some simplicity there. But, there are potentially other ways of doing it. This is really, what is proposed here is, an optimization of what the agency currently does and would allow us to establish a floor and also provide technical assistance to towns participating in the program.
So to follow up a little on Senator White's question, this is for you or Mr. Evans, but would the standard you would propose, and one of the things we've heard is watersheds are cover multiple jurisdictions, so that sort of comprehensive system mindset needs to be part of planning and rules, et cetera. So would the state's standard that you're proposing presume that, and so even if it's a piece by piece municipal standard that has to be adopted, by virtue of adopting that standard, people will already be part of a more integrated sort of mindset and strategy for managing things.
That is the larger idea. I think that Rob would have a more articulate technical response to that. How a consistent standard would allow for greater protection on a watershed basis.
Okay, well, he just, as you said that, he waved his hand.
Sorry, Rob, I can't see you. That's best if you're.
That's okay. That's okay, Hannah. I'll perk my hand up as needed if I think it's helpful. I guess first, before I get to Senator Bray's question, just to circle back on Senator White's question, currently the RPCs are similar to our program in working with towns and planning commissions on adopting standards, at least FEMA minimums. We recommend higher standards. We have model bylaws. To your question, Senator White, about RPCs providing capacity going forward, yes, the opportunity is there. Hannah is correct. I think it really comes down to, funding for them. Language was put in statute in chapter 117 in section 4424 for us to delegate our technical review. I want to remind everybody that right now towns have to submit their hazard area permits to Rebecca Pfeiffer's shop for review and comment. And so we review and provide those technical comments back to towns. So we're supporting towns in their permitting as kind of a technical consultant. And after the 2012 session and that addition of language, we stood up a pilot process to delegate our review to regional planning commissions. There were no takers at the time. I think they would be interested if there was some steady funding to support that. And then if there was a minimum standard, not only would we be training towns, we'd be training potentially regional planning commissions to assist with that review. So I think they do exist to provide that capacity, but that's a more detailed question perhaps to ask the regional planning commissions.
Thank you.
And then Senator Bray, one of the currently in our model bylaws and in our state rules, we have no adverse impact standards. And this goes to that consideration of downstream impacts. The FEMA minimums allow you to build and fill and increase flood hazards over time. And our standards and the standards that we would adopt through rule would implement those no adverse impact standards and essentially ensure that development isn't just reducing risk to the new development, but they're not increasing flood elevations, flood velocities for adjacent properties and downstream property owners. So that's a real important gap that would be good to fill on a statewide basis.
Okay, great, thank you. General McCormick.
To what extent, and I'm not sure who I'm asking, to what extent is this an unfunded mandate? Are we gonna what's it gonna cost our towns, and what kind of financial and dollars and cents, what kind of support are we giving?
I'll jump in here. They already have complex regulations on the books, the 90% of towns that are in the National Flood Insurance Program. And going back to the map that was in one of Secretary Moore's slide deck about the FEMA map update process, which is going on statewide, that requires towns to open up the hood on their existing complex bylaws and make sure they meet NFIP, National Flood Insurance Program minimum standards. This is most of the standards that we would recommend or codify in rule are dialing up those existing federal minimum standards. So it's not layering on, 20 new regulations in a town. Again, going back to what I just spoke about, there are a couple of new standards that would layer on regarding no adverse impact and evaluation of projects in that regard. But again, we exist currently to provide technical support to those towns. And so this optimizes our relationship with towns where we have a consistent set of standards. So we're not reviewing kind of town by town what their bylaw is before we look at their permit and their development review projects. So in terms of administrative costs to towns, I would hope it would ease their administration as well as our technical assistance.
How would it ease it? I don't.
They can use the technical assistance in a way that they can't now, I guess is the same. But you are requiring a higher standard. It's this is the crux of the debate right there.
Well, we've got a couple of towns, and I'm sure everyone have help. We have several towns that really got hammered, and right now they're overwhelmed. And they are looking to the state for help. And I'm not sure if they're gonna look at this and say, oh, great, thanks for all the help.
Now, it's a fair concern, and I just want to be clear. It's a federal minimum requirement, and it's required of towns currently, and required of us through our current state rules and authority, which is to do substantial damage determinations after a flood to determine post-flood permitting requirements if you're rebuilding flood damaged structures. That is extremely difficult, full stop. And this does not add to that. That is still there. That's another conversation about layering on capacity, bringing in outside experts to assist. We did that. We brought in experts from Florida in July to help with that permitting assistance to a number of towns. So that's a real pain point. We get that. This does not add to that. It doesn't necessarily take away from that because it's not getting at that very narrow flood response permitting piece of these regulations. But I hear you.
It seems to me like, to your point, where we have two tasks at hand. There's the immediate task of responding to the flood we just had. Meanwhile, we're saying, let's think ahead to the next thing, then yeah, I could imagine somebody saying that's more work, but it seems like unavoidable work if we're gonna be more resilient. Okay, I'm mindful of the time. I don't know if we can finish our walkthrough by 11, but we'll see.
Okay, yes, I can try to move quickly. The next revisions to this section move out Title 10 and into Title 24 related to municipal authority and municipal bylaws. This first revision is to 24 VSA 4302, which relates to the purpose and goals of municipal and regional planning. The agency's proposed revisions here are primarily just to cross-reference the state flood hazard area standard tool. This would only be a requirement, the way the agency's drafted it, it's only a requirement for municipalities to participate in the National Flood Insurance Programs. So in this purpose and goals section, we just included language referencing the NFIP and the state flood hazard area standard. It's a cross-reference, not a regulatory requirement. We've proposed a revision to 24 VSA 4382, which talks about municipal plans. This section 12 refers to municipal plans shall include the following. Currently, it says a flood resilience plan, and we've added language that says these flood resilience plans can include strategy. The strategies may include adoption and implementation of the state flood hazard area standards. Again, just a cross reference to that rule that the agency will adopt. Then there are revisions to 24 VSA 4424, which relates to municipal flood hazard area bylaws. This one explicitly referenced the state flood hazard area rules. The municipality may adopt bylaws to participate in the NFFP. And so we're saying that you either would need to adopt a flood hazard area bylaw in conformance with the municipal plan, in conformance with the state flood hazard area rules, or in conformance with a local hazard mitigation plan. So just making sure that there's consistency across what municipalities are required to do if they're going to update the bylaws. The rest of, there are additional amendments to.
Can I just quick, I'm sorry, I'm slowing this down, but these are mays. The first one was they shall adopt. And then we have a pair of mays. So just as a beginner on this topic, wondering why we're not using shall each time that you write such a plan, that you shall use the rules that you're proposing, the new standards.
So this first revision to 4424A,
Yeah.
municipalities are not required to adopt flood hazard area bylaws. That's why this is a reference to any municipality may adopt a bylaw under this chapter in conformance with municipal plan, the flood hazard area rules, or a local hazard mitigation plan. We're not changing any requirements that municipalities adopt flood hazard area bylaw.
And that's what the 10% of people we've heard, I feel like I've heard 4%, 10%, what is the amount of people or municipalities that have that now?
There are 274 NFIP participating communities. And the NFIP communities have to have some type of flood hazard area regulation that they're implementing in order to maintain eligibility.
Oh, so then I'm getting confused. What's the one that most towns aren't doing?
River corridors.
Oh, okay.
Thanks, Rob.
Yes, yeah, to be clear.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Watt.
Thank you. 174 is more than the number of cities and towns we have in Vermont, so some places must have multiple.
I think that it's the village, town, and Rob, this is where Rebecca is. You're the expert in all the minutiae, but Rob, if you can help me, I know that we've got more participating communities than we have technical municipalities in the state.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's interesting. It kind of depends on who you ask. I mean, if you go into FEMA's database, their community information system, officially there are 247 communities because they don't acknowledge the split where you have villages and a mix where you might have a town and village regulated under one entity. So we get a little bit more granular when we're counting those participating communities and break out the villages and the like. But any way you slice it, about 10% of Vermont municipalities are not in the program, if that helps.
That does help. Thank you very much.
Mhm.
The following revisions to 4424, if you refer to what is required if a municipality has a flood hazard area bylaw. So there's language in subparagraph A saying that the bylaws, the purpose of the bylaws is to ensure the design, construction, and development minimizes or eliminates the potential for flood and loss or damage to life and property, and ensures new development will not adversely affect existing development. That's the no adverse impact assessment, and that would be part of this flood hazard area state standard. In subparagraph B, contents of bylaws, this is where we're actually mandating that if you have a flood hazard area bylaw, the bylaw shall require compliance with the state flood hazard area standards established pursuant to 10 VSA section 755 and meet all requirements under the National Flood Insurance Program. The agency has struck some of the current language that's in this provision because instead of including explicit requirements in statute for what the bylaws would contain, we're just saying you must comply with the state standard, which will then contain those detailed requirements related to development. then subpart 2 there says the flood hazard bylaw may contain standards for river corridor protection to minimize alluvial erosion hazards. So those bylaws, we're not mandating that, we're mandating compliance with the state flood hazard area standards. And then allowing municipalities to also have a bylaw that contains requirements related to river corridor protection.
And
Just. So what is the purpose of telling people what they ought to do? While. We've got floods that are. Use life and property. So why are we being asked, and it's just like. The witnesses, that's not a fair question, but witness, I apologize. We had testimony yesterday from the administration that this would cost money, but they don't have any proposal. And they're not, we beseech them to have a proposal, what are we doing here?
I think I'll answer, and since it's, you said a question, you said kind of quite fair for the witness. My sense is, but if the administration had a proposal, we wanna really understand like the nuts and bolts of how that proposal would work. It begs obviously the question you're raising, the, okay, so I just that funded or deployed, which is, you know, a question.
We're not mandated. Is it unfunded and mandated?
Right. So I think that's a great question, and we're not there yet, and that.
We're not there yet, I mean, we don't even, we see it, we just drive around it, we don't get there.
Well, then help us make sure we don't just drive around it, but I think what we're trying to do right now with Ms. Smith is to understand the proposal in terms of if it were implemented, here's how it works. So I get you,
There are a bunch of stuff towns ought to do, that makes common sense.
I understand.
They should do it.
Yeah, I understand your frustration. But to just make sure we all understand what we're talking about, that we're doing the law. So I don't wanna put off your question.
I wish
entirely.
we're in a.
So I share your concern.
Boots have been.
Yeah, we still need to know what we're talking.
Yeah, they're in the swamp.
They're in the. Is it a bad?
Snowshoes, wear snowshoes when you go out there, so here we go.
Keep slogging.
Thank you.
Sorry to drag.
An answer, thank you.
So yes, edits to 4424 would mandate that flood hazard area bylaws comply with the state minimum standards established in the law. And that includes edits to the section on river corridor management. We've got one final section related to dam safety. The only revisions that the agency is proposing to Tennessee chapter 43 as it relates to dam safety is the proposal related to the dam safety revolving network fund. There were other edits to that chapter in S213 as proposed. This is
Liability.
the liability piece, yeah, there were a couple other tweaks to some of the existing language around inspections, and. There were, one of the things that the secretary flagged is there are some edits to S213 that would refer to the department rather than the state agency with jurisdiction. And there would be, we would need a more comprehensive set of revisions to chapter 43 overall to actually effectuate that transfer of jurisdiction of all dams to the department. Currently, 1082 distinguishes between dams regulated by PUC and regulated by DEC. So, you know, that would be, the agency has been in conversation with the advocates and with the PUC about the possibility of that, but the language in 213 does not fully effectuate that transition.
Okay, are you trying to not read and talk, so stop doing that. Yes. There's a language here, spell out how that transition might take place. I know that, for instance, Secretary Moore, if I'm remembering right, said, yes, we're interested in doing that. We're also interested in doing it over time. I think it was not prior to 27 or something.
The red line edits do not comprehensively provide all of that information. There is a bill that was introduced in the House, I believe, that does actually have a set of revisions to chapter 43 that are intended to effectuate that transition of jurisdictions.
Represented by Holly's bill.
I think it's, yeah.
Thank you. Senator Watson and Senator White.
Thank you. So Representative Mahali's bill, you think is a closer representation of how, like the language that would be necessary to fully make that transition?
Yes, it includes all of the revisions to chapter 43 necessary to make the
Okay.
transition.
Okay,
And although we don't do it this way, and you and DNR review that bill and are you, since there is sort of a general agreement of looking at how that transfer might take place, are you generally supportive of that bill? We don't have it in here, but.
The agency is supportive of a transition over a longer time period that is allowed for in the House bill.
Okay, so similar concept, different timeline. Okay, thank you.
That was my question.
Right. I'm
The agency's provisions to the dam safety revolving loan fund, I think that in a lot of ways reflect what's in S 213, but there are some differences. I would just again walk through the agency's proposal, acknowledging that I won't capture all of the things that are in S 213. It would allow, currently there is an unsafe dam revolving loan fund. Funds from this, so this is a revision to an existing section of statute, 10 VSA 1106 is currently the unsafe dam revolving loan fund. Funds from that fund are only available when a dam has been determined to be unsafe, according to the process that's in 10 VSA 1095. That process involves either a petition from members of the community to the department saying we think this dam is unsafe, or the department can act on its own motion to investigate the dam that they think is unsafe. There is an investigation and hearing process involved in that, and then the agency would make a determination that the dam was either at imminent risk of failure, in which case the agency took immediate action, or it is unsafe and needs time-sensitive critical work in order to come back into compliance with safety standards. Currently, funding is only available for dams that have gone through that process. This language in the agency's proposal is intended to open up the funding sources so that we're not just providing funding to dams that are at imminent risk. Rather, we can provide funding to a broader scope of dam rehab or removal projects in order to sort of get away from being reactive.
Are those funds constrained in any way in terms of, if someone said, oh, this is gonna improve habitat, water quality, et cetera? Are those sort of excluded from helping you win a grant, for instance, if it's really oriented to dam safety?
The funding is oriented to dam safety, but there is some nuance there because in a project that requires, again, when there's imminent risk to life and property downstream, the agency can take immediate action. When a proposal is made that requires a dam order, where the agency is actually issuing, we call it dam orders, it's outdated language, it's permit, basically.
Other people have rougher language than that.
Yeah, that's fair, yeah. When we issue the order, we do consider all of that criteria, including compliance with the water quality standards. So in some respects, there is a connection before you're eligible for funding that you're actually getting a permit that's necessary, and that permit will look at the other components of what's required for a dam rehab project.
Great, thank you.
As drafted, the revolving loan fund would have funds available for emergency and non-emergency funding. And this is consistent with in 213, it's divided between emergency and non-emergency. It defines what constitutes an emergency funding eligible project, what constitutes a non-emergency eligible funding project. DEC owned, dams owned by the state of Vermont would be eligible for emergency funding, but not non-emergency funding. To be eligible for I'm sorry, I'm just trying to hit the high points. To be eligible for non-emergency funding, the dam must be classified as significant and high hazard potential and be in fair, poor, or unsatisfactory condition. So there are sort of criteria around eligibility for funding.
So you're, narrowing it a little bit, to focus on risk.
Yes, exactly. The idea is that in evaluating funding eligible projects, the dam safety program's primary concern is reducing risk. Yeah. Although that, I mean, those are the sort of high points, for non-emergency funding, the dam owner. Shall be required to provide an operation and maintenance plan and dam safety compliance schedule, as well as financial information to show sufficient resources. Are available to maintain the dam, so this is funding for repair or rehabilitation. The idea being that if there's funding that's going to be used to repair rather than remove a dam, the dam owner demonstrate that they can then maintain the dam in that condition. This could be a high burden in some cases, and so, removal might be an even more financially viable option.
And although we don't see it here, the emergency action plans that we discussed back in December 5th, and with that's actually implemented through the rulings and that's currently in place, right?
Yes, the dams are required to have emergency action plans.
Right?
The actual completion of your rulemaking process around dams is until 2026.
2020, July 2025, is when the design standards are slated to be adopted.
Thank you very much. Any other questions for me? Right? Thank you.
Thank you.
Very much. Very helpful. And it's 26 seconds out, so you would like a timing over there.
Thanks.
With that, so we haven't paused at all. I would just encourage anyone on the committee who needs to pause to do an individual pause, but given that we have a lot of material, I thought we'd just keep going. The stalwarts keep going, others may.
The week will.
Let me fix that. The reasonable may pause, the unreasonable will stay. Okay, but we're moving next, that's why. Good morning, Ms. Oates, thanks for coming back. So I think we had asked you all to evaluate the administrative proposal, we heard yesterday, there's a little more detail this now. And wondering if you can provide the committee with your response, since you helped us draft S213 and it's stuff.
Yes, sorry, I'm trying to join the Zoom link while I wait for my internet to catch up. For the record, Lauren Oates, Director of External Affairs with the Nature Conservancy. Thank you for having me back in again. I'm starting to get very used to this chair, for better or worse. Let's see. Send me the Zoom link in Jude. I hope that Senator White makes it back from her break. Because I made that table that she said she'd love to see. We were in here yesterday providing some testimony, but since we hadn't yet seen language from the agency before we were testifying, it's nice to have the language so that we can actually come in the papers. Right, you can enough, you can't hear me and I can, no echo.
It's a lot like you on the screen.
That I have to admit, though I'm holding a cup of Vermont shade that's in Colorado.
What's it, it's don't look quite right.
Share that, so she was. Something about this. All right, here is the spreadsheet I told you I would create once it shows. I'll zoom in. And I will hand you a digital, hard copy for those that like them. Yes.
Rita, you sent your, whatever, presentation you're doing, was you sent it to Ms. Newman so we can put on our webpage, thank you.
I have, yes. There you go, has colors. All right, so first I would say, and I'm sure that you'll hear from Ms. Daly and Mr. Carpenter following me, that we would urge you all to continue to work off of the S213 bill as the committee has drafted it. Including keeping the mapped river corridor definition in there, because we will continue to advocate that we do need to be regulating this area and therefore need to make sure that it is defined in this legislation. Senator McDonald, I appreciate your comments and sharing your frustrations. I'm hoping that this table may answer your question and frustration. So the first chunk is S213 river corridor and floodplain section as is currently drafted. And it kind of breaks it down into like the three main components. So as drafted, it says that you all will recommend the agency to rulemaking around the existing flood hazard area river corridor rule to adopt language for statewide permitting authority in the mapped river corridor. That's the first line under the green. I've told you several times over now, I'm thinking about this bill in 4 ways: public safety, cost of flood damages, municipal burden that they are currently carrying, and the natural resource itself. So the questions are captured that way. The river corridor recommendation is currently drafted in S213, checks all of those boxes and checks them with a high level of fidelity. Again, the language that is currently in the S213 version is and was unanimously adopted by all members of the Vermont Climate Council for the Climate Action Plan in 2021. And again, all those other statements too. The other part of the existing legislation or draft bill is the expansion of the same rule for permit authority in the floodplain. So the river corridor and floodplain pieces you keep hearing about, it also checks all of those boxes, and some of those boxes is to a lesser degree, and that's again because the floodplain is a less dangerous area and it therefore incurs significantly less costs and damages. Generally speaking though, it still is an incredible municipal burden, so that checks the high box and the others are varying levels. I'm gonna move my little box so that can see all my comments. Recognizing, as I said yesterday in my testimony, given the FTE or full-time employee burden that the agency anticipates the floodplain specifically would carry. And because there's significant coordination that would need to occur with the Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA. We would support phasing this portion in, but again, strongly urge you all to keep in the language under the river corridor. And we're happy to work with any and all parties to suggest language to that effect. And then the third part is that mapping process for infill development in the river corridor. That it now currently says to include the Agency of Commerce and Community Development and the Regional Planning Commissions. That only checks one of the boxes, but it checks it pretty well, and that's the municipal burden. Having that municipal voice in the room is incredibly important. It has not been done in the past and has led to some pretty significant consternation and issues. So we would recommend keeping that in. So now we're moving into the orange part, which are responses to the A&R proposal that we all just walked through.
A quick little, help me better understand what goes on, please, you were saying, they're mapping when municipalities aren't adequately involved in consumer very frustrated, so. Who's leading that map making and why did it end up becoming frustrating to a municipality?
So the original river corridor map was released back in 2014 or 15. Pretty sure that date's right. And it was released and developed with not a lot of inclusion from the regional planning commissions or the Agency of Commerce and Community Development. both of whom have a significant stake in like really recognizing these are the areas, we've talked again about the existing settlement versus designated center, where we have significant infrastructure that we've already invested in, and where we know based on discrete topographical differences between what we might have on, LiDAR data and what we have proposed in a map, that there are changes that can and must be made or considered, and having those two entities at the table. And that was a recommendation that was supported by both the League of Cities and Towns and Regional Planning Commission in their testimony, would be incredibly invaluable, though the map is still developed and owned by the agency. It would just be in coordination as drafted.
So is it, I'm trying to think of what each party might bring to the discussion. So are you saying like scientific data, like elevations and stuff like that is accurate, but that's not enough to know how to best manage it, because the town, for instance, has thoughts about development, or they know what past floods have done, or stuff like that. I mean, is it
Yeah, there's
the lived experience versus like the topo map sort of?
Yes, with a little bit more than just lived experience, because there are some discrepancies between what might be best available data of technical staff and agency, and because these flood events are happening so frequently,
Yeah.
that there are changes to topography that,
You can
to
get
your
outdated.
outdated, right,
By virtue of
yeah.
things moving.
Yeah, and it would bring in the, like, here's what our current municipal plan, zoning regulations they've adopted and you say, and just like recognizing any changes that might need to be made at the municipal level. And both of those entities can really bring that level of just information to the table as the agency would redevelop the maps.
Thank you.
All right, so moving down into responses categorized in these buckets again, make sure you can still see these. So while we're talking about mapping, the language as proposed by the agency does not include the Agency of Commerce and Community Development, nor the Regional Planning Commission, so I'll just say that, again, it's not applicable for 3 of the 4 boxes, but based on the conversation we just had, I think that if that municipal voice and consideration isn't part of the conversation, the actual municipal burden might be exacerbated because it has been folded in. At best, it's just a no. It doesn't help the municipalities. At worst, it might exacerbate it. No, so I'm gonna scroll down. Yeah. You guys have some questions?
Sorry, Senator White.
Thank you, Chair Bray. Do you think that we would actually see, okay, I guess we've used this term a few times, you can't get blood from a stone. Setting a statewide mandate doesn't necessarily mean that it will be done. Do you think that there is a likelihood that we will not see compliance? Or do you think that it would be compliance, but it would be taken from obviously other parts of what a municipality or a volunteer could be accomplishing?
So for the river corridor recommendation, and this is where the staffing, and appropriate staffing really comes into play. Right now, we have about 10% of our towns.
Yeah, so this is
This
the,
is the 10-ish% of towns that have adopted river corridor bylaws, the language that the agency has developed for municipals on their municipalities to decide whether or not they want to adopt. I think you would be very hard pressed, I think you've heard a testimony before me, to say that all 10% of all of those
or
towns
even,
are actually enforcing and regulating appropriately. This kind of creates, well, not only the 10%, it would now be 100% of towns that have a map river corridor would go to the agency. You're going to the agency staff, which will need to be expanded, as we've talked about. And they would be the ones that would enforce and regulate. Will there be some gaps? Yes. And that goes to the piece that you've heard from all of us, agency included, that there really does need to be a significant outreach component. Like what you are recommending, should this go into law and then eventually rulemaking, will be a significant change, and municipalities really need to understand. So building in that outreach time is really necessary so that enforcement is done. And that there's a real understanding of these high hazard areas and that they're no longer be developed in large part.
thank you.
Moving on, I haven't heard the phrase yet in testimony, but effectively what's being recommended is a minor change, what I'll call a minor change,
with respect to the river corridor regulation in this proposal. That still upholds that patchwork jurisdiction that we've heard. Largely, the river corridor will be regulated by municipality unless those areas that are exempt, which are again, Act 250 and Section 248 PUC large energy projects. In those Act 250 areas where that is triggered, and I should say, and then state-owned parcels. The change that I'm reading is essentially saying now, as it stands right now, when Act 250 is triggered, the permit will go to the agency for review, the draft plan for what's being proposed. The agency, the Rivers program gets to review that technically and make a technical recommendation back. Yes, we think this is a good idea, no, and here's what might make more sense. It is only a recommendation currently, and the district gets to make a decision based on that recommendation. The minor change here is it's saying when Act 250 is triggered, the agency staff gets to say yes or no. That's, again, the Act 250 parcels, like those areas when it is triggered is a very small piece. And that is why you're going to see no's checking all my boxes. I would say that there is a benefit in doing that. And that's largely, one, if you're reducing quite a bit of inefficiencies of back and forth between agency staff and district personnel. As they make recommendations and now they actually get to say yes or no. And you're avoiding any of those even smaller cases where the agency staff say, we don't think you should do this, and the district says, thanks, but no thanks. So that's a very small change.
So,
What does that look like? What? Yes, triggered, what is, what triggered? Riparian acreage?
For the river corridor, yes, so this is specific to the river corridor, yep. So anytime there's a proposal that would trigger Act 250 in the river corridor, currently, agency staff will review and make a recommendation. The proposal by the agency that you just heard says they actually get to say yes or no, but only for Act 250.
Who says yes or no, the agency?
The agency would tell the district, based on our new expansion of our rule, we get Act 250 permitting decision-making power to say no, not within the corridor. Right now, it's just a recommendation.
Agency gets.
Yeah. The Rivers program staff, right now, they review Act 250. A proposal that is in the river corridor and make a recommendation only, and the district has to decide. It's highly inequitable because different districts act differently, which is one of the bigger problems with Act 250. The recommendation that was just proposed by the agency would say, for those projects when Act 250 is triggered, the agency's technical staff, rather than the state, would actually get to say, that's in the river corridor, you don't get to do it. Okay.
Or you do.
Or you do, yes,
So the agency's position is dispositive under it.
excuse me,
The agency's position is dispositive under it. It decides the question. It disposes of the question. It answers the questions.
yeah.
I think
It's in charge.
right, so we have Ms. Smith in the room still, so I think you were saying that the decision of the agency will become a rebuttal for some people one G.
Correct, the agency would be able to issue, not be able to, we would issue. A flood hazard area river corridor permit for that project. Currently, we don't have permitting authority. We just provide regulatory recommendations as Mrs. was explaining, so then. The commission can decide whether to take our recommendations. With the change that we proposed to 754, we would have our state. Our flood hazard area river corridor permitting jurisdiction would apply to those Act 250 projects. We would issue a permit or do not have a permit. What the district commission does with that, again, is that's in the world of Act 250, but at least we would be able to impose the regulatory requirements.
The agency-
River corridors on the project.
The agency would not be issuing an Act 250.
No, no.
Okay.
It would be the rebuttable presumption that's created with our stormwater permits or wetland permits, where the agency still has permitting authority. And that would then create a assumption that there's compliance with the Act 250 criteria.
A rebuttable presumption as opposed to a dispositive.
Correct.
Okay.
That was definitely a question for JD, so I'm not sure.
Or an Act 250.
And as you've heard me say many times over, this should not be going through Act 250 at all. Okay, so, well, are we good on that line before I go on to the next?
It's like,
Great. The next part of their proposal is, with respect to that proposed, state standard for the flood hazard area. Again, that's the floodplain piece, not the river corridor piece. My review of that is that you'll see an asterisk across all of my columns here. And that is to the point of Senator McDonald earlier, it is, it would still require municipal adoption. It creates a great deal of efficiency should those municipalities adopt it. But it still relies on municipal enforcement. Even then, again, because the floodplain is different east, so to speak, than the river corridor, it won't check those boxes, and therefore, I would argue that impact is essentially negligible for what's being recommended. With respect to the section that starts with encourage flood resilient communities, again, there are a lot of shoulds, and all of those shoulds fall on municipalities. Which is why you'll see no's across the board again, and a potential exacerbation for the municipal burden. Actually, that's not even potentially, that will be exacerbated. It is saying a town should do all of these things. Because we know that they should. And that's why we're arguing, if you've had all these incentives in place all of this time, and we have all of the threats in the world, and they're still doing it, is because it is time for the state to take over. There is no incentive in this section. There is no support and there's no impact. My final statement on the bottom is that the proposal from the agency altogether does not address fluvial erosion or river corridor flooding in a meaningful way. Aside from that small shift Act 250, there is no expanded jurisdiction or regulation of Vermont's #1 natural flood hazard area, where 80% of flood damages occur and where the potential for loss of life and property is greatest. I think that it's still, my review of the proposal is that it still upholds status quo effectively, that patchwork jurisdiction. And it still leaves the burden of administration of these high hazard areas on our towns. I think that's it. I will say a little addition is that I really do appreciate and want the language to go in for appropriations, and I, again, would be happy to work on any proposed language changes that could be added to S213. I'm happy to deal with more questions too.
Senator Watson?
Thank you. So on the second to last one, the state flood hazard area standard. Can you explain that one? Like, just my gut reaction is that it seems like that ought to reduce risk, reduce damage. By getting it, because I feel like the way that it has been framed anyway is that with municipalities being all over the place, having a standard will bring a lot of those towns up to I should say it'll raise the standards for a lot of towns. So I'm just putting it out there, like, help me understand why those are no's.
No, with an asterisk.
With an asterisk, and
first, it's already like, again, significantly lower, because this is addressing the 20% problem for state, not the 80% problem.
Right, because of
And
the
80%
floodplain.
problem, as I'm saying in my bottom
Right.
thing there, is altogether not addressed in
Okay.
this proposal.
Yeah.
So the 20% problem, the floodplain. This still, because it will still require adoption and enforcement by towns. Being from this world, I know that the towns who have said time and again, the regional planning commissions and the League of Cities and Towns, this is already an incredible burden for them to navigate this. And that's even for towns that only have flood hazard areas, they don't have zoning regs. For those that do, they have to navigate their own patchwork system and really understand the changes that are made. It will still require significant outreach and education, and only then it will impact future new development. I do think that there is a minor benefit in those towns that will adhere to, comply with, and enforce. But again, I think it's so much smaller, and
Okay.
You're missing the river border piece altogether, and it's the real, what I would argue, fundamental need and mandate, especially following last year's floods.
And to follow up on Watson's question, there's a part of me that has the same sort of gut level reaction, well, it's an improvement, but are you saying that, so it's not that you're opposed to the provision?
Not at all.
You're saying in terms of effectiveness of addressing the most pressing needs related to flooding and flood damage, this is not a particularly effectual strategy.
Correct. I don't at all oppose it as an individual.
But
If the river border piece was in there and this was in there, it would be like, yes. What I wouldn't want to see would be, oh, we think that we've checked a box because we've adopted a new statewide minimum standard for NFIP participating communities. And the argument I'm making is you want to do that. That will not be the effect. So no, I'm not opposed at all to that language, provided again, there's extensive work with, and I would recommend maybe even calling back in the league and or the regional planning commissions to ask their take on this piece.
Yeah.
They're the ones that really have to help towns understand what the implications of that would be.
Yeah. And on your sort of theme of folks who have been contributing to that conversation so far, is that Tasha Wallace or Chris Cameron?
I think Tasha, Chris, or Charlie Baker will be able to speak to that. I think Chris and Tasha might be the most eager too, but I think all of them would be able to carry that forward.
Great. Well, thank you very much for a weak visual learn that you came with the chart.
Well, fair. Well, sure. I just say, right, thank you all.
It's a reason our speech is developing math. How was it a lot of stuff? I don't think so. Right, thank you. So, Mr. Carpenter.
Mr. Chair. Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me back. And it seems to say Dan on the record. So I don't have any charts, my apologies. I do have notes. I didn't really get a chance to respond to the agency, for the record, Jared Carpenter, Relations Planning Committee. I didn't have any chance to respond sort of high level yesterday to the agency's testimony, to Julie's testimony. But I'll do that here, and I'll also talk about, on a lower level, different parts of the dam safety section. Two initial points that came up repeatedly yesterday that I think we should reiterate. One was, and this was an issue that we talked about a lot when we talked about regulation of dams in 2018, that resulted in the rulemaking process for phase 1 rulemaking, and then now what is phase 2, which was talked about a fair amount yesterday, that will be done in July 1st, 2025. And that was whoever derives the benefit from the dam should be paying for the maintenance and upkeep of the dam. Sometimes it's a lot of people that derive benefit of it. I would make an argument as a resident of Montpelier that I and my fellow citizens here derive a lot of benefit from Redstone. The Big Flood Control Dam upstream, where the folks downstream from Waterbury Dam in Richmond derive a lot of benefit from that. But a lot of times it's a smaller pond, it's a smaller dam that's in somebody's backyard. Maybe it's the frog pond, maybe it's the skating rink, the swimming pool, whatever. And yes, if that dam goes, for whatever reason, it might damage somebody's property, wash away somebody's house, often do road damage, take out, culverts, a bridge, things of that nature. I would make an argument, the advocates would make an argument that onus should be on the dam owner to maintain that dam if they want to keep it and derive a benefit from it, not necessarily a dam safety fund that's run by the state. We're not against the fund, not by any means. We think it definitely has a purpose, especially for emergencies. But there should be criteria, and there should be reasons where it's set up, where in certain situations that is either used for emergency funding or non-emergency funding. If an owner of a smaller dam has a problem with the burden of paying for the maintenance of the dam, they should seriously consider removal of the dam. And that is one of the criteria, and I can get into it later, for non-emergency funding. The alternatives analysis is to look at okay, what are the alternatives to repair? Is it removable? Is it a breach? Is it other things as well? And what other benefits would derive? So need to look at that sort of more broadly. There was a lot of discussion yesterday of we need to have a fund for dam repairs. Agreed. It's just under what conditions set and who qualifies. There's only $1 million, as of right now, it's only a proposal for $1 million in the FY 2012 governor's FY 25 budget proposal. You know, I believe the secretary said some, the need was somewhere in the range of $20 to $70 million from the US, so $1 million isn't, another argument is $1 million isn't gonna get you very far, so you should probably save it for those emergency funds. Anyways, so that all being said, another issue, no, I sort of hitting both at the same time. So I am going to refer to the draft number 1.1, which came out on the 25th, which was Friday. That's the 40-page committee version of the bill. The dam safety provisions start on page 15, and go for quite a bit. We are in favor, we are certainly willing to open the discussion to some of the changes. We are in favor of, obviously, the language that we suggested with this in Friday's version, including the jurisdiction transfer language. We think that's very important. We do have timelines will have to be discussed with the agency. We would prefer things to happen more quickly. Right now, the bill has, for some reason, the dam safety section has a blanket effective date of July 1st of 2024. And then reports to the legislature starting, it says January 31st, so I'm assuming January 31st, 2025 of the next after the effective date. But some of this is, we're gonna need a little more time to stand it up than July 1st of 2024. So I mean, in terms of the fund and subsequent rulemaking and the jurisdictional transfer language, there's gonna have to be somewhat of a phasing. I think of effective date of July 1st is awfully ambitious. So the bill added, the Friday's version added H 615, that is Representative's bill that transfers jurisdiction of the dams from the PUC to the Agency of Natural Resources. So there are, according to my notes, as of right now, the PUC has 4 high hazard dams. Chittenden Reservoir, Marshfield, which is here out of town, Wolcott, and Middlesex. 6 significant hazard dams, and Peachum, Norton, Joe's Ponds, Lake Madeline Dike, and Patch Pond, and there's 13 low and minimal hazard dams.
Where's Patch Pond?
That's a really good question.
I feel like we have a cat.
I'm making a next on that in a minute.
That's literally what I'm at.
We'll follow up.
I think it's just outside Harlem.
Oh, great.
So, in terms of the jurisdictional transfer, the agency has offered a July 2028 timeline of wanting to do that. We think that's a little bit far out, and a phase-in would make more sense. I'll go down, when I talk about timelines, I'll talk about all of that together, particularly to the high hazard dams, moving over to ANR rather promptly, and then maybe the low and significant hazard will be 2028, but it would make sense to move the high hazards over the dam experts, the dam safety experts as quickly as possible. So that covers, looking at 1.1, that language, there's a lot of this, as you go through pages 20 and 21, which is Hannah referenced, there's a lot of sort of clearing things up. It no longer says the state agency having jurisdiction unless it's the department for the city. That's just a lot of project language. On page 22 is a part that we talked about last time I testified. Public good. It would be the responsibility of determining the certificate of public good would go from ANR, would go from the PUC over to ANR, as we recommended before. If you look at page 23.
One, sorry.
1.1 from Friday with highlights, that's, so yes, we're grounding this thing deeper.
So what, you're on each foot,
I'm now on page 23.
1.1.
Yes. I don't know why that's on the.
Page on graph.
Well, so the draft that is our last draft, that came, that included committee updates. Draft 1.1.
Yep.
Dated 1/25/24, 4:55 p.m.
Okay, I have a different, oh,
I think neither of those.
yeah, I don't have this.
Oh, my apologies, no,
I have a different one completely,
I'll do my best, maybe the committee never, it doesn't have.
Oh, we have it all this time?
That's my apologies.
okay. This is not the 30 pick.
That's as introduced, I'm sorry,
That's not your fault.
I made an
That's-
assumption that I shouldn't have. But at any rate, so we should.
I didn't ask you to bring copies for it because not everyone wants copies. But we can make sure that everything.
How long will this stuff graph be relevant to the conversation?
Yeah, really.
Probably a few days.
For a few days.
Oh, okay, well then, yeah, I guess it would be nice to have a copy of it.
I don't, do I have a copy of it?
Mike sent it to you and to me.
Oh, well, that's,
Oh, I should have squared this up with you all.
Sorry.
it's a lot of,
There's a lot of versions going on.
make it work with my version. I know, I was trying to find the one you were, well, could you tell me potentially?
So the jurisdictional transfer will do a few things. It'll take the dams from the PUC over the ANR. There's 23 total, 4 are high hazard. Remaining are others, and the two things that it will transfer over is one is the dam safety program will be in charge of the inspections. And then DEC will also be in charge of the certificate of public good. And there's a number of factors that go into that, including, you know, you have to consider the scenic and recreational values of fish and wildlife, forest programs, all sorts of things, hazard navigations, water quality, all sorts of things that are under ANR's umbrella that they are already determining. Right now, they are making recommendations to the PUC on the certificate of public good. If we move all that authority over to ANR, it takes out the redundancy. And it's just, everything is much more directly controlled by the dam safety program and DEC. As it should.
Have you, so I know that there are dam owners who are currently regulated through the PUC. That feel like the review that they're subject to is related entirely to safety. But doesn't address the sort of ANR-ish thing that you were mentioning, like water quality, habitat impacts, et cetera. So if you, I'm just trying to make sure that we all understand who's doing what exactly, what the stats, what's going on currently, prior to making changes. So I don't know if, like for instance, Ms. Smith, do you have any comment about what degree, what kind of information ANR contributes to the CPG process at PUC?
Sure,
Sorry, we didn't ask you to be prepared on that, but.
this is Hannah Smith with the Agency of Natural Resources, there are. I think that sorry, Jared, but just to be careful about the language, the CPG, the certificate of public good. That's issued under Title 30. Relates to the, so. Determination of public good and certificates, this language in 1086 is currently, so the agency. I think that some of the verbiage is confusing because these are just processes that have been in existence for a long time, and we've got two different agencies doing what's essentially the same thing. But both agencies issue what are essentially permits allowing for modifications of dams. PUC does it for the dams that they have jurisdiction over, which is any dam that's produces hydroelectricity that is not a federal dam. DEC does it with every other dam. A CPG under Title 30 relates specifically to the production of electricity. And so the agency would not, we would not have that, DEC would not assume that authority. We would just be responsible under 1086 and under Title 10, Chapter 43 for issuing orders for any modification to a dam moving forward. Under the current process, PUC does that for their dams. They use a different administrative process for doing it. It's a little bit more of a I don't wanna mischaracterize it, but it's a more formal, like hearing type process with the dam owner. Whereas DEC treats it as sort of like a permitting process where we work with the applicant to develop a proposal that meets our criteria. Everybody, DEC and PUC are subject to the requirements currently in 1086, that to authorize a modification of the dam, we look at the project, we look at scenic and recreational values, fish and wildlife, compliance with water quality standards. We all do that right now. PUC has their own process for evaluating that criteria. The dam safety program does not participate in PUC's review currently. PUC requires applicants to hire their own consultants to generate most of the information necessary for them to make a decision. DEC's process is different because we have an engineer that works for DEC and we have a slightly more informal permitting process. Same criteria applies across the board though.
Great, well, that's helpful. So the review for everything other than electricity being generated as reflected in the CPG itself. The two review processes for dam safety, impact on the environment, is equivalent.
They should be,
Well, approximately.
I'm sorry, what was?
I said, I don't know if it's exactly equivalent, but nearly so.
Yes, PUC, when they issue an order for a dam modification, that's not related to the generation of electricity. They're looking at the same criteria that DEC is.
So, I'm just flagging this for myself and the committee, like, I think we're gonna need to hear from PUC and some dam owners who have an interest in how they're regulated and where they're sealing. And sooner rather than later, okay, they're white.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to point out that this kind of two different bodies regulating slightly different groups of dams does concern me. I would like to see that resolved. And I believe it was in the auditor's report that they flagged that as a concern with the way that we regulate dams currently. So I'm wondering if it's worthwhile to have the auditor come in and reflect some of the things that they had in their dam safety report. But at the very least, I do take that seriously, that it does concern me that we have two different regulatory bodies looking at it, rather than this kind of this same. But what I hear is that the CPG would still happen either way. If DEC were to take over the regulation of these larger dams for safety, but the CPG and all of that would remain, so we still have their authority over the energy generating piece, if that's correct.
Fresh on, we did something with this last year, we had a bill changing some jurisdiction.
There was, we had a conversation with PUC. Like these, the agencies had a conversation and I believe the PUC made a proposal. Transfer, sort of to initiate that transfer jurisdiction process. I don't remember if there could have been a bill introduced, but it didn't move.
Might have been part of S80.
Okay,
The discussion of S80 when the phase 2 was pushed back a year or two, so miscellaneous A and R bill, we might have gotten into the discussion.
Yeah.
It wouldn't surprise me.
It seems to me we actually legislated on that, or something, because I remember having to explain. The distinction of power dams and flood control dams and federal jurisdiction and PUC jurisdiction.
Oh, well, we can take a look at it.
Yeah.
And see what's in there. Okay, so, but we would need dam owners and we need the PUC and we're
So
chasing.
thank you for the clarification, thank you. The argument would be that a lot of, the vast majority of the expertise is over at A and R, so therefore. The vast majority of the authority should transfer over to their jurisdiction. Some of these things that I have in my notes, I won't go into because it's specifically relates to the bill, but I'll stay somewhat high level and leave some time for Karina. In terms of the dam safety fund, we would like some more specifics, and draft 1.1 has those on the emergency funding. It's particularly having to do with funding being available more so for an imminent risk. Some of the language we had put in was only time sensitive temporary safety and risk reduction measures are eligible for loan subsidies. I think it's something that needs to be considered where the emergency needs to be like, an imminent risk of something for emergency funding, and that the agency would have a lot more discretion when that can be used. For non-emergency funding, as there are two components to the fund, we would offer that a series of criteria must be met as there is no imminent danger, otherwise we'd be talking emergency funding. So the process could be more deliberate, and the version 1.1 from Friday has some more points in that that's not necessarily reflected in the A&R bill. Particularly revolving around the alternatives analysis language that you required, that if you consider whether floodplain or wetlands restoration should occur, water quality, aquatic organism passage, public recreation opportunities, costs, things of that nature, really looking at more of a broad spectrum than just repair of the dam. And another thing that is not reflected in the timeline is there's going to need to be rulemaking for some of this, especially for, I would believe, for the non-emergency criteria. The A&R's version has a number 6 for rulemaking, the alternatives analysis, and 7. The requirements for an alternative analysis would probably also have to go to rulemaking. And that's part of the timeline proposal as well. So generally, considering the timelines for rulemaking, right now, as you heard yesterday, phase 2 rulemaking, which was enacted in 2018, that's to be completed in July 25th. And that's the one that's the technical standard dam safety rule addressing the dam design standards. We don't want to interfere with that, get in the way of the program or anything like that, because it's imperative we get those done. So we would suggest that for non-emergency funding rulemaking, that be completed on July 1st of 26 or even 27. So there would be, and I can send you language, Mr. Chair, we can come on Friday with things in writing. But we would suggest that
Yes,
this is,
you're seeing my eyes spin a little bit.
yeah, I'm sorry, I'm trying to go faster than I should.
You're picking up the vibe, so it's, at this point, marking up so that we see exactly what you're proposing.
Yes, no, I will come in with paper in hand and maybe, I can think about put into 1.1. And finally, the jurisdictional transfer, the
Yeah,
agency.
you're gonna mark up, let's mark up 1.1.
Okay, I will put them in Friday's version. When the jurisdictional transfer, the agency wanted to do them by 2028, for a number of reasons. They didn't want to get in the way of phase 1. There's also gonna have to be a petition to FERC to see if some of these dams should be under FERC jurisdiction, and we believe some of them should be. Probably most, if not all, the high hazards of Marshfield should be considered a FERC dam. That is gonna have to petition to FERC and go down to DC and go through their process, which could take a number of years.
What is it that makes them suitable for regulation by FERC?
They have to be hydro generation, and I think that's the main criteria. Do you recall, Karina? What makes a dam FERC eligible? Is it just
Water of the US.
generation?
Yeah, most of the all the dams in Vermont that generate power that are not under federal jurisdiction came online prior to the Federal Power Act being adopted.
Right.
So
Pre-1920 or 30.
yeah, pre-1923 or something like that.
Right.
So it's really just sort of a subcategory of hydro dams that escaped that regulatory regime. And FERC does reevaluate, they accept petitions to determine whether a dam should be under their jurisdiction.
So there would have to be a petition process probably for most, if not all of these dams. We would think rather than waiting for the petition process to complete for the transfer, at least the high hazard dams. We would wait, okay. We would suggest that the high hazard dams move over immediately under A&R jurisdiction, and then the others could wait. I know that is the difference of opinion with the agency. You would prefer that they stay in the PUC, and the PUC handles that process. I guess it's a technical thing coming out of the. And so I was suggesting, we were suggesting July 1st, 2025 to the agency to assume jurisdiction over dams with high hazard in January 1st, 27, but that as well in 28 to assume jurisdiction over the remainder of the ECCS. And that is it for me, and I we will work on markups so you have actual paper in front of me the next time I come in, but thank you.
Thank you very much. Any questions from the department? Anything? Ms. Daly?
Yeah,
Again, we have it for me, for all of us.
you know.
I don't see, I know I just admitted you, but I don't,
You're like
off again.
I am, I have to go back in. Just trying to get ahead of it, but. Too fast. Unmuted. Into that. There we go. Good morning.
Morning.
Hi, for the record, I'm Karina Daly, restoration ecologist with Vermont Natural Resources Council. Good to see you all again. This slide should look familiar. I've shared it with you before. But I'm here today just to respond to some of the testimony we heard yesterday related to the wetlands portion of S-213. Yesterday, ANR took the position that the policies proposed in the wetlands bill are unnecessary because they are already doing them. This relates mainly to the net gain policy. And our response is that if we are already doing them, then we should codify this into policy. We need a statewide net gain policy to protect the functions that wetlands provide for flooding, for climate change related to increased biodiversity, and water quality. So related to that, I am happy to go through the points on this slide related to the wetlands policy, but I wanted to share the next slide. Get there. This is it's coming. Think. Oh, there we go, I got it again.
Your computer's messing with.
I'm looking at it. So this is a slide that the agency shared with me. Actually, it was a presentation that was open to the public of the net gain of wetland acreage that has occurred. And this is unrelated to the Vermont Fish and Wildlife Department's, the excellent work they've been doing to conserve wetlands and restore wetlands across the state. But this is related to impacts associated with permits to wetlands. So this slide just shows the 18.5 net gain acres of impact that have occurred since between 2016 and 2020. And I just wanted to bring that to all of your attention, that this work is happening. It's already happening, but it's clear also from this slide that it's not happening in every watershed. So that graph at the bottom of the slide shows a deficit of wetland no wetland gain, wetland loss in the Connecticut River and the Upper Hudson. It shows a substantial amount of gain in the Richelieu and the St. Francis. So part of our policy proposes to make sure that that on-site mitigation, that's a 2-to-1 ratio, is happening within the watershed where the impact is occurring. So trying to restore the function within the same watershed is critical.
And that's what this statewide policy proposes. So, I commend the agency on the good work they've been doing with wetlands negging, but we need to codify that into state policy. And that's really all I have to say. Happy to answer any questions if you have.
Certainly.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I really appreciate you pointing out kind of the logical fallacy of, hey, we're already doing it. Don't worry about it. Don't put it in law. But my assumption was that they weren't doing it based on that response. So I'm wondering, is it true, is that original statement true that they kind of are meeting the standard already as an agency?
They are mitigating at a 2-to-1 ratio for wetland impact as an agency.
They are meeting that.
They are meeting,
Okay,
they're meeting that. They aren't meeting that in every watershed.
yeah, that's okay.
And there's nothing to hold that true because it's not a policy.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
So, but as it's written here. The net gain would have to occur within the same watershed,
Yes.
and I'm recalling the
hut.
the hut, right, what size watershed we're talking about, because I guess, like the size, the hut that is referenced. It's not, is it this scale? It's not this scale, it's
No,
smaller.
It's smaller.
Yeah,
So we
okay.
went
That's-
from hut 12, which was fairly small, so that my example was the Huntington River versus the whole Winooski.
Right,
So we modified that to hut 8, which is the Winooski, yes, the major
Right.
basin.
yeah.
What hunk is this? This is.
That's a good question. I'm not sure how, so these are the 4 major watersheds in Vermont. I don't know what hut. But that is a
those
really
hucks
good
get?
question.
It's gotta go.
One.
Yeah, well, no, it's the other way. That's what's confusing is bigger.
Right, so hut
Bigger is smaller.
hut 12 is smaller than hut 8,
So hut 1 is gonna be like
yeah.
Atlantic Ocean, Pacific Ocean.
I
don't know.
I need to find that out.
Yeah, that'd be interesting.
Okay. Nuance.
Yeah.
You know, maybe on a future visit, if you can come in with a map that shows. Huck 8 and 12, sort of, so we can see the relationship.
I would be happy to provide that. It'll be very glad. I think that would be good.
Yeah.
That would be interesting to sink in,
Mhm.
how big these things are. Okay, alright, any questions for Ms. Daly? Right,
I apologize.
That's okay. I understand. I'll be back.
your season's passed now.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So committee, we'll make sure everyone has a hard copy of last Friday's, I think it is, revision for my degree. That's the 1 point cost. And I'm asking people who are coming in to see us to be marking up based on this work.
But that's, your version had 40 pages and that version was 32.
We'll get it.
Okay.
I don't know if anyone else's will be different. This is me just sitting print on my micrograde ethic committee.
Should have highlights.
And it does indeed, that's
What?
so that's all, so sorry, it was the folks we're already working with, but there and Karina had already proposed edits, and some of them were proposed even before the session began, but our drafting deadline was whatever, December 1st, something like that. So I said, let's please bring in any edits I already was aware of, and I would have included them in the bill introduced had it been possible. So that's where we're at now, this version. And now we're into the phase of, we're hearing from advocates plus A&R. And I'm trying to see what we build, but stick to this as our baseline document. Just for version control, like we're all editing one thing every time we talk.
Thank you,
Yeah, please.
it's helpful to know why that version is different from this one, since we hadn't really talked about to change together, so it's good to know.
Yes, and so sorry, that I was just trying to clean up, so let's. We'll do that, I apologize, we didn't talk about why they went. Sort of when it
may have been. That was an error.
and the chest. Okay. So, thank you, everyone, I'll work with Jude and have some people who own dams, as well as ask these here to come in and talk to us about that piece of thing. I have a little bit of a wary eye on what happens when we start messing with moving too many things between agencies just because of the potential black hole effect, like, wait, we thought we were gonna be editing our bill, and then we thought sucked into something that. Okay, so, totally game for it. Just instinctively flinching a little.
Is there a section, is this the PUCDEC
Yeah.
application? Oh, I'm
Sometimes. Sometimes, every time I've ever dealt with something like this, someone keeps peeling another layer of the onion open. And eventually we run out of onion peeling time. So,
Mr. Chair, could we get, I had made a recommendation that we have all the auditors report. Recommendations be included in S213.
you asked Michael to.
I did, and he sent it to both you and I.
Okay,
I did not send it to Jude or anyone else, obviously, because I didn't know how you wanted to include those. Would that be something to request maybe before we get a 1.1?
well, we should probably walk through it
It's still on.
as, it's always,
Bells and knocks and.
yeah.
We're still on our.
So, if Michael has drafted them, let's, get copies for everyone.
Okay, I will.
And then, I would ask, so we'll figure out a walkthrough of those. I looked at the auditor's report, I don't remember, so it'd be good to see what those recommendations look like. The language.
Perhaps could we invite someone from the auditor's office to review it with us?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. So I think that's it for logistics for the moment. Tomorrow, we're keeping our Act 250 iron warm. So we have some more work on 213. Mason Overstreet has been working on a bill related. One of the things they discovered post flooding is polystyrene.
Yeah.
Gets floats away, floats get. Polystyrene blocks used in,
Unencapsulated boat dock.
yeah, that material. When docks get ripped up, once apart, then it turns into debris, forever polluting polystyrene. And it drifts away in the flood. So there is a bill, H 373, I think it's in the House, and I asked him to send that language to Mike so we can look at that as well. If it looks like something that is a pretty clean and straightforward thing, maybe we fold it into the spill. It starts to get too complex, then I would jettison it and say, we'll get that downstream. Not hard, I mean, it's hard not to use metaphors that are the same. What we're working on.
Order over there.
Yeah, there you go.
Mr. Chairman, yesterday, the PFC. People who are.
Oh, yeah,
PFCs.
PFCs.
I'm sorry, you're the science teacher.
Are we on record? So.
That's still in the record, yeah, so, So, I'm sorry, who are we talking about?
Okay, then, the forever account,
Yes.
okay. The claim was made that they are on the backs of solar collectors. And that they are an essential integrated parts of the batteries of electric cars.
Yes. Is that what you're saying?
No.
I'm not hearing you, but
the forever chemicals, the vernaculars, but
PCBs or
Oh,
polycyclic
the stuff that polluted the wells in Bennington. PFAS.
PFAS was what was it?
Well, that's what I said first time, now,
Okay.
that's, I thought it was PFAS, right?
Okay, so PFAS
That's,
is,
that they are ubiquitous, that it's not just a matter of a few products, that it's,
yeah,
solar collectors.
okay,
I am not, I was not aware of that, and I'm not aware of it now, I don't know enough, I know this, the claim has been made, and it should at least.
okay, so is this related to the bill we're working on, or just this is like you're helping us all
This
stay?
this was an end of the morning before we adjourn.
Okay,
I guess we'll go under other business.
okay, I just wanted, Senator Watson, you have a handout, is this related to the same visit?
Yes, I received this information from the people who were here yesterday talking about PFAS, so I was looking for any mention of EVs for solar fuels, and I'm not seeing any right now, but that doesn't mean that that's not.
Okay,
It was in the press conference. So, yeah,
can you chase that down a little bit, so we'll know what we're talking about?
I
This is where you say yes. That's-
I don't know where so again, I'm not making that claim.
No,
I'm saying it's fine to be made, and we should take a look at it.
Okay, but since you're bringing it up, could you help us gain access to the information we've been get to look at?
Okay, we could start with Mr. Brayback, there's the first place we'll say.
Okay. Anything else that we wanna keep track of? Thank you for that. You know, there's a lot of pieces moving and they're only moving, there's only more pieces and they're all moving faster with each week.